Till this area of rain moves in, and that will affect parts of Northern Ireland during Wednesday. It never makes much further progress east because high pressure builds and turns drier everywhere.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky. That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello and welcome to GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst and here's what's coming up this Monday. More than 50 Tory MPs have urged the Prime Minister to change modern slavery laws to make it easier to send migrants home. A letter organised by senior Tory MP David Davis has demanded that those travelling from safe countries such as Albania are forced to leave faster than the current system allows. It also comes as GB News can reveal the Channel crossings have resumed again after a period of bad weather, with 6 boats being intercepted so far today. Another headache for the Prime Minister, with multiple Conservative MPs declaring over the weekend they'll not be standing in the next election as they look certain to lose their seats. In China, President Xi facing his greatest challenge since coming to power, widespread protests across many cities at the treatment of citizens in the coronavirus lockdowns. There have even been calls on him to resign as the protesters become increasingly bold. But how will the leadership react? We'll have the latest. And in the World Cup, the latest on the Battle of Britain in the desert of Qatar. As Wales and England prepare for their showdown clash tomorrow, Welsh supporters have now had 6 tons of alcohol worth £1 million delivered to help lubricate their voices for the game. Before that, though, let's get the latest news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, 2 minutes past 12. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. More than 50 Conservative MPs have signed a letter urging the Prime Minister to change modern slavery laws to help ease the migrant crisis. The group, including former cabinet ministers, says migrants they believe are bogus asylum seekers who claim to be the victims of trafficking can't then object to being returned to their home country. MPs, including Sir Graham Brady and Esther McVeigh, say the amendments would be a strong deterrent for those thinking of making the crossing. The government says there isn't one single policy to resolve the crisis, but that it would use every tool at its disposal. Armed forces could stand in for hospital staff as part of emergency plans to deal with possible strikes over the winter. Health officials are drawing up contingencies to cover frontline workers as ambulance drivers and paramedics consider joining nurses in their upcoming walkouts. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says they're concerned about the impact the action could have on patients.
Well, no formal request has been made by the Department of Health to the military, but of course we will look as part of our normal contingency plans at a range of options. The priority for me is to continue the dialogue with the trade unions, with the RCN. I've been extremely clear that my door is open. They have raised a range of issues, not just pay, but also about working conditions, patient safety, and so I'm very happy to continue that dialogue.
3 people have been arrested after 2 babies were found dead in a home in Bridgend in South Wales on Saturday. 2 men, aged 37 and 47, and a 29-year-old woman have been arrested on suspicion of concealing the birth of a child. They remain in police custody. An investigation's ongoing and police are appealing for anyone with information to come forward. The government's launching a £1 billion scheme to make middle-income homes more energy efficient. Hundreds of thousands of homes could receive loft and cavity wall insulation for 3 years from spring. It's mostly being targeted at households that don't currently get support to upgrade their homes, with a fifth of funding being targeted at the most vulnerable. The Business Secretary, Grant Shapps, told us the measures were there to help reduce energy consumption.
This £1 billion, which is in addition to a lot more money that's been provided previously, is to allow anyone in any kind of housing, could be private rent, it could be their own home, could be social housing, to improve the property in order to make sure that it meets those higher standards. And that will save people, quite a lot of money.
The Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, told us that Labour wants to insulate 19 million homes as soon as possible.
It's about 10 years too late. I mean, this should have been a quick early win for the government, reducing people's fuel bills and doing the right thing by the environment. I mean, it's a win-win. Why has it taken so long? This government have neither the ambition or the direction. Of course, I welcome when they come a little bit onto our territory, whether it's a windfall tax or greater energy efficiency ambition, but they've got nowhere near the comprehensive programme they need to get this country onto the right path.
In China, authorities have put up barriers around parts of Shanghai following a weekend of protests against strict COVID restrictions. 10 people were killed in a tower block fire, sparking civil unrest. Demonstrators claim that coronavirus measures may have hindered people's escape from the fire. They're now calling for President Xi Jinping's resignation. Human rights campaigner Luke de Pulford told GB News the protesters will continue until their demands are heard.
There are many things all combining here. I think it's partly the lack of information that people within China have about other people's COVID policies outside of China. That's angered people a lot. It's the Urumqi fire, which was, really terrible. The reports are that they couldn't get out because the doors themselves have been barricaded by the authorities as a part of the extremely restrictive COVID measures. But yes, of course, it's the economy. People are going into their 4th year of this stuff now in China. They've had enough of it.
Amid the chaos in Shanghai, a BBC journalist was arrested. Well, the Foreign Secretary's described it as deeply disturbing.
Hey, are you okay? Barry, call the consulate now.
Moments before that, Ed Lawrence was handcuffed by police. The BBC says he was beaten, kicked and held for several hours before being released. The broadcaster says the Chinese authorities claim they arrested him for his own good in case he caught COVID from the crowd. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. So, hundreds of people have begun arriving across the English Channel in small boats once more after bad weather in the past fortnight prevented the sailings. At least 6 small boats intercepted in the Channel so far today after the weather conditions improved overnight. It also comes as around 50 Conservative MPs have written to the Prime Minister urging him to introduce emergency legislation to return Albanians and others to their home countries more rapidly. Health officials are also expected to confirm that dozens of migrants suffering from diphtheria were moved from the Manston Processing Centre in Kent to hotels across the country. Our Home and Security editor Mark White brings us the latest details.
After first light, the Border Force vessel Typhoon could be seen approaching Dover Harbour, with the first of hundreds of migrants picked up in the Channel this morning. Around 50 people were taken on board Typhoon for the journey to the Dover Processing Centre. For more than a fortnight, bad weather has largely scuppered attempts by the criminal gangs to push boats off the beaches of northwestern France. In fact, since the 13th of November, just one small boat with 36 people on board has made it across the English Channel. But conditions are now flat calm, meaning some of the thousands who've been waiting in various makeshift camps around Dunkirk and Calais are being funneled down to the beaches and onto the boats. Increasingly frustrated at the government's seeming inability to get a grip on the crisis, around 50 Conservative MPs have written to the Prime Minister, demanding he introduce emergency legislation to deal in particular with the number of Albanians arriving in small boats. They want all Albanians rapidly removed back to their own country, and any who claim to have been trafficked also returned home.
Are you concerned about the spread of other diseases, Home Secretary?
It is yet more pressure on the Home Secretary, already dealing with the consequences of dozens of migrants who were infected with diphtheria being farmed out to various hotels around the UK, even though they were highly infectious. It is a growing health crisis within a migrant crisis that shows no sign of slowing. With good weather conditions throughout most of this week, authorities are braced for the possibility that thousands more could cross the Channel in the days ahead. Mark White, GB News.
And we can get the very latest live with Mark joining us now in the studio. Mark, as we've seen from your pictures there, flat calm almost, allowing the boats to set sail once again. But the point is, this is coming after the deal was supposed to have been signed with France to prevent this happening, or at least try and intercept some of those boats.
Yeah, this is the first real test of how well that integrated policy is working with the French. And clearly today, half a dozen boats have made it across so far, and in the days ahead, because the weather conditions are expected to be pretty good, we are expecting hundreds, thousands potentially will cross. And it just goes to show really that, you know, the French can do so much on their side, but even if they stop those migrants getting across one day, they turn around, they get a new boat, they come back and they just attempt and continue attempting to cross until they get across.
Yeah, and of course, as you've been explaining, just the length of coastline for them to patrol there. But the political pressure is growing at home now. We've got this letter, 50 MPs, including senior figures, David Davis, even Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 Backbench Committee, saying we need to change the law. Modern slavery laws, no less, being talked about. I mean, it's quite extreme measures.
Yeah, I mean, they believe that the government's been tying itself in knots with this, particularly over the issue of Albanians. We know that more than 12,000, actually, we were told that about a couple of months ago now, so it will be considerably more than 12,000 Albanians who've crossed the English Channel so far this year. Now, they're crossing from a peaceful country that would not seem to have any legitimate claim to asylum. Individual cases, of course, might be different. But what the MPs are saying is, look, you know, there should be an ability to make a very rapid assessment of the legitimacy of someone's claim and then just get them on the first flight back out there. And those that claim to have been trafficked, which is actually a very significant number of those who are coming across, because they're schooled by the criminal gangs who send them across. This is what you say. You tell them that you're a victim of modern slavery trafficking. Again, on that point, the MPs are saying, well, if that is the case, that they've been taken forcibly from their own towns and homes and sent across the Channel to be modern slaves, then they would welcome a rapid return back to their home, you would think.
Right.
But things are never as easy as that. They're often much more complicated, and there's layers of challenges that can be appealed
so
on behalf of an individual that's come across. When the lawyers get hold of it, it can be stuck in a system for months, sometimes years.
And we've seen the length at times to process the asylum claims, hence the problems at Manston down in Kent. Now, they have cleared that, but the rider is that many of those who've been moved on seem to be, or are suspected to be, suffering from diphtheria, one man having died already.
Well, there was an imperative when there was 4,000 people at Manston, a facility that's only ever supposed to process people for a maximum of 24 hours. Well, many of those 4,000 people were being kept there, Mark, for days, sometimes weeks. That became a crisis in itself, an imperative then on the government to get people out of Manchester and into the interim accommodation, such as hotels. The difficulty was people coming over from conditions in living rough in the jungles of Calais and Dunkirk were coming, many of them presenting with diseases or actually not showing that they were symptomatic but carrying diseases. Then they were farmed out to hotels, and we think about at least 50 people with diphtheria have been sent around the country to various hotels.
Right, and we've seen the unease with local authorities about people arriving in these various seaside towns especially and taking over hotels and the demand that's making on local services. And I guess now local health services will be adding to those concerns, wanting to check those people, even though perhaps the diphtheria won't be passed on because we've had a national vaccination programme, of course, to reassure people.
Yeah, in terms of a wider health emergency, you would hope, because as a nation, we're pretty well vaccinated from childhood from diphtheria. However, take into account that many people in the UK at the moment will have arrived here in recent years from countries where they probably have not been inoculated against diphtheria. And we're talking millions of individuals. The population of the UK has grown by about 6 million in the last 20 years. So a lot of people that will have come from countries where they maybe didn't get that particular vaccination, so might be vulnerable to diphtheria as well.
Yeah, and of course the health service will still have to deal with all those people. Yeah. Mark, for the moment, thank you for updating us with the very latest on the migrant issue. A headache for both Prime Minister and Home Secretary. And elsewhere, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak facing growing political pressure from his own MPs on two other separate fronts. More than 50 signing a letter to demand that to change to modern slavery laws, as we've just been discussing. And the signatories including senior party figures David Davis, Liam Fox, Esther McVeigh, even the chairs, we were saying, of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. But the Prime Minister is also facing calls to lift the ban now on onshore wind farms. The former Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, amongst that group of MPs. Also a growing list of party members saying they will stand down at the next general election. The Net Zero czar, Chris Skidmore, the latest to do so. Let's get the views now of former political secretary to Tony Blair, John McTiernan, who joins us. John, thanks very much for your time once more. It does seem battles on multiple fronts, which, of course, you will have seen in Number 10 with Labour Prime Ministers previously.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Although this seems to be an unprecedented number of fronts, doesn't it? You've got the crisis in the Channel, which the sheer numbers are just overwhelming the Home Secretary. You've got crisis on the Tory backbench who are trying to unravel the legislation. You've now got the onshore-offshore wind debate, where it looks as though Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, who both, as Prime Ministers, were in favour of the onshore wind ban, are now against the ban on onshore wind. And with Labour in favour of onshore wind, that looks like a defeat in the House of Commons for the Prime Minister, for the Tory government. And it feels a bit there as though Boris Johnson's doing anything that he can to undermine the current Prime Minister, because I've seen it reported that his supporters say, oh, she'll be out by May and Boris will be back. And then you have, it's not quite the chicken run. Remember, in previous elections, we've seen people in marginal seats, Tory MPs in marginal seats, moving to safer Tory seats. This is a kind of retirement run, isn't it? People saying, well, I'm not going to be defeated. I'm going to get out. The most dramatic is obviously Matt Hancock, who got out and went to I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. And we've now got I'm a Tory MP, get me out of here going on. People trying to get to a situation where maybe they can claim a job before the other Tory MPs can claim a job. So I think it's multiple fronts.
Yeah, and of course the polls will be concentrating those minds. But what happens then to a government when it has to start firefighting? Does it make it difficult to make a progress on policy fronts and find a way forward?
Well, if you think about it, there's three problems, basically. The one problem is your attention is on the firefighting, not on the strategic decisions you have to make. Secondly, you're really focusing on party management. You're not talking to the country. And to get your poll numbers up, you've really got to talk to the country. You've got to find a way to engage with the issues around crime or the issues around energy bills, any of the issues, cost of living, that really hurt people. You've got to engage on that. But you're actually talking to your backbenchers, not talking to the country. And you're vulnerable to where you make strategic decisions being blown off course by Labour and the broader opposition, finding a way to ally with your own backbenchers. So you're kind of, it looks as though you are, in the famous saying, in office, but not in power.
Not in power, yes.
And that feeds through the system.
Yeah. In the interest of political balance, when we're talking about strategy and distractions, is Keir Starmer right to have gone on this issue of private education? It's giving a bit of ammunition to the Tories at a time when he really should be trying to hammer them and go on other issues.
Well, I thought what was interesting about the debate around VAT, putting VAT on private school fees, only 8% of kids go to, I think 7 or 8% of kids go to private schools. So it's a tiny minority. But in the budget speech, Jeremy Hunt actually said in the budget, I've looked at this, the opposition are calling for it, it only raises £1.7 billion. Now, I don't know about you, or viewers, I reckon most viewers watching the show are thinking, £1.7 billion, that's quite a lot of money to raise for education. So basically, Labour are saying, we're doing this, it raises £1.7 billion, the Tories have said it will, and we can spend that in your schools. And so it gives Labour a way out of accepting the spending limits of the Tories and finding a way to be creative, like you spend it on teaching assistants or whatever. So I think Keir's going on to an issue that a lot of people are worried about. It's not top of the headlines, but he's saying, look, we could do something with it.
Yeah. OK, thank you very much indeed for that view. So a former advisor to Labour, Tony Blair. Let's now hear from a former advisor to David Cameron, Philip Blond, joining us. Philip, thank you for your time. Just to pick up on what we were hearing there about firefighting, that you're in government but not in power. I mean, what sort of hill does Rishi Sunak have to climb now these next 2 years?
Well, almost every hill. The fundamental problem is nobody knows what the Conservative Party stands for. Nobody knows what the Conservative Party ideology or philosophy is. It's changed so rapidly from extreme free market to state intervention to level up to Cameron's third way to what do we have now? What is sort of Sunak's main message, main mission, other than being sort of reassuring the markets and lowering the cost of British debt? It's not at all clear that there is a vision. And when there isn't a guiding philosophy, you can't lead people. Because Tory politicians are probably from all of the four groups that I've mentioned, and they need leading. You lead through ideas, and there are no governing ideas other than managing a crisis in the Conservative government at the moment. And that's the real source and origin. If you had a clear kind of ideological offer that people thought was persuasive, you could help kind of suppress these permanent rebellions. But it doesn't exist. So all you've got are different kind of incoherent kind of attempts to kind of lay a claim to that philosophy.
Yeah. Is it also that they're not afraid of the whips or party discipline any longer because they're looking at the polling numbers with an election perhaps less than 2 years out, and they're thinking, well, the goose is cooked anyway. Why should I take any side sort of cognizance of what the whips are saying? I'll just vote with my conscience.
I think that's true. I think that's a very strong element. And the trouble is that compounds the sense of kind of end of an era. And if you talk to professional pollsters, as I do, none of them can see a way forward for a Conservative victory at the next election. The party's been doing so badly for a while, hasn't in any way catered to its 2019 voters. The majority of its MPs are kind of Thatcherites without a following, because Thatcherism no longer speaks to the needs of the country. And we saw the consequence of that with the Truss government that failed disastrously and very quickly. So they think they don't have any long-term future. And unless Sunak and create that future, this will only get worse, as John outlined earlier.
Yeah. However, if the economy does start turning round, if inflation and interest rates start coming down in the spring and summer, could he buy himself a little bit of political profit, if you like, with that, in that, you know, he's seen as the competent pair of hands?
I think it's a question of damage limitation now. Like,
right.
Will it be a catastrophic collapse, which might take them 4 generations to recover from? Or will it be a minor collapse? And I think what many on the right are now saying is that what we have to rethink is PR. Because in PR, at least we'll get a shot at governance. Under the present system, we won't. And only 10% of the population, but about 80% of Tory MPs are Thatcherite liberals. And they've dominated the party. And they've driven the party into a wall. And they haven't catered to the working classes that Boris assembled, to the polity that Boris assembled. No coherent offer in any way, shape or form. And these are the consequences. And now this whole settlement is breaking down. And what will come? Certainly a Labour victory. But if Labour brings PR, there's a way back. Outside of PR, they could be shut out for the 4 elections.
Philip, thank you very much for your assessment on the changing tides of politics. Thank you very much indeed. Now, doom and gloom on the political front, it seems, Ronnie, but how about a bit of sunshine? Well, let's bring you the latest pictures from Doha in Qatar, and that's a splendid scene, isn't it? We are told the temperatures are starting to creep up. Not good news ahead of that game tomorrow, of course, between England and Wales. Let's just update you that today we've got South Korea in action against Ghana. Favourites for the tournament, Brazil, meeting Switzerland. And man of the moment, Cristiano Ronaldo in action tonight for Portugal at 7, taking on Uruguay. But in terms of the game tomorrow, England and Wales, we're told the Welsh supporters have got 6 tonnes of alcohol worth £1 million in the various bars and hotels, ready to either celebrate or perhaps drown their sorrows. And I speak as a Welshman. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Coming up, Will Hollis reporting on the concerns at Skegness in those migrants being housed there and the pressure it's causing on local services. Let's take a short break first.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Well, we were updating you that at least 6 boats have been intercepted as the sailings resume across the Channel with migrants. Now, with UK households already stretched with struggling with those various bills, tensions rising in the increase of migrants being housed in hotels and needing access to local services such as healthcare. Well, the residents of Skegness, a busy tourist hub on the Lincolnshire coast, have now demanded answers from their local MP. Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis sent us this from the town hall meeting.
A community at boiling point, the local MP trying to cool tensions.
They are from some of the most war-torn and troubled.
Despite sitting on Britain's edge, Skegness is at the centre of the migrant row.
I'm passionate about, the residents that live here, and a lot of us aren't feeling very safe.
We don't know the backgrounds of these people, where they're from, what have they done, what are they actually running away from.
They're getting free medical treatment. We can't get a doctor in Skegness.
Not everyone is worried. One Ukrainian woman questioned why she was welcomed so warmly, while these men are met with hostility. 5 hotels are being used by more than 200 asylum seekers, while the Home Office struggles with processing delays and a lack of accommodation. Skegness MP Matt Warman says the future is uncertain, but he understands people's concern.
When they say, for instance, we want to know when a hotel might stop being used, I think it's right that, as I say, I'm honest and say, look, I can't give you a date right now. What I can do is apply the maximum pressure to the Home Secretary, to the government. This is a situation that those people themselves say is not acceptable. We've got to move on from it as quickly as possible.
More than 2 million visitors descend on Skegness each year, but out of season, it's quiet and hotels are largely empty.
The Home Office says that accommodation is needed for 37,000 asylum seekers here in the UK.
Some locals say trade is already turning away from the town. Danny and Adrian are on the town council.
Without tourism, it's the major industry that we have on the coast, tourists. And if we lose the tourists, then Skegness will be in trouble.
These people that are here, unfortunately, have just gone through, perilous waters to get to our shores with no money. So they can't support an economy that struggles for over half the year.
The local district council, East Lindsey, declined to comment, saying it's a Home Office issue. But in cases where asylum is granted, the council could face additional pressures, according to the leader, Craig Leyland, speaking of his own accord.
We would say there's a balance between what we can do locally in terms of the numbers that we can support and how that goes forward. That's our concern, is that balance. We don't want that to tip over into community cohesion problems when that balance tips the wrong way.
In a statement, the Home Office said that the use of hotels to house asylum seekers is unacceptable and that it's a temporary solution. The UK hit its highest levels of net migration this week, despite Brexit and border promises. In Skegness, a town with the highest Leave vote in the country, referendum wishes and reality are very different things. Will Hollis for GB News in Skegness.
Well, coming up here on GB News Live, more on the unprecedented scenes in China. Is it a China crisis indeed? Civil disobedience in many cities as people stand up against the country's zero COVID policy and censorship. All that to come. First, let's get an update on the news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 12:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. More than 50 Conservative MPs have signed a letter urging the Prime Minister to change modern slavery laws to ease the migrant crisis. The group, including former Cabinet Ministers, says migrants they believe are bogus asylum seekers who claim to be victims of trafficking can't object to being returned to their home country. Today, GB News has learnt that at least 6 small boats with around 50 people on board have been intercepted in the Channel and have been taken to Dover for processing. The government's considering asking the armed forces to stand in for hospital staff during possible strikes this winter. Health officials are drawing up contingencies to cover frontline workers as ambulance drivers and paramedics consider joining nurses in their upcoming walkouts. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says they're concerned about the impact the action could have on patients.
Well, no formal request has been made by the Department of Health to the military, but of course we will look as part of our normal contingency plans at a range of options. The priority for me is to continue the dialogue with the trade unions, with the RCN. I've been extremely clear that my door is open. They have raised a range of issues, not just pay, but also about working conditions, patient safety, and so I'm very happy to continue that dialogue.
The government's launching a £1 billion scheme to make middle-income homes more energy efficient. The 3-year scheme will see hundreds of thousands of homes receive loft and cavity wall insulation from the spring. Households that don't currently get support to upgrade their homes are going to be prioritised, whilst a fifth of the funding will be set aside for the most vulnerable. TV, online, DAB+ radio, you're up to date on GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2085 and €1.1547. The price of gold is £1,455.22 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,461 points.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
And welcome back. Now let's update you on some fast-developing international news, with China seeing growing anti-government protests being staged in all of its major cities. In unusual scenes of disobedience, people have been holding up sheets of A4 white paper as a symbol of their movement. And since the initial demonstrations against strict zero-COVID policies, they've grown directly to call for the removal of the president. Well, the protesters believe the extreme COVID measures blocked 10 people from escaping a tower block fire, and they were killed in that blaze. A number of people have now been detained in the capital, Beijing, and in Shanghai. Well, Samuel Armstrong joins us now from the Free Speech Union, formerly the Henry Jackson Society think tank. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Samuel. This does seem now to have developed further from just a direct protest at the COVID lockdown to a direct challenge, really, to the president.
Yeah, well, let's be clear. Any protest in China is a direct protest to the one-party system, Chinese Communist Party, as led by Premier Xi. He has been very clear that he doesn't believe that protest against his rule is a right, it's a freedom. So by the very fact that these people were protesting and doing so in Shanghai and Beijing, very much the heart of modern China, this was always a direct challenge. Now, at the beginning, some of the ploys are holding the blank paper. Some of them were holding up mathematical formulae that in Mandarin have a sort of similar sounding name to the word freedom. There was a degree of cleverness or sophistication. Increasingly, actually, we're seeing what the Chinese people always wanted in the first place, which is freedom, which is democracy, which is the ability to choose their own way of being governed, to not be locked in their homes, literally having their doors welded shut at points for weeks on end in order to placate the whims of their dictator.
Yeah, and this, of course, comes after that fire with these lives lost, and that seems to have been a trigger point. But as you say, it does appear from what's being said by the protesters, perhaps not openly, that this is just now real frustration with their way of life. Just, a month into his third term and what appears to be him attempting to be ruler for life.
Yeah, and let's not forget, of course, that the young in elite cities like Shanghai and Beijing are often exposed to the wider world. They know what it's like to live in the West. Many of them attended school here or university. Many of them will have friends in the West, and they know what freedom is. And it's interesting that it is these young people in these prosperous cities that are leading these protests. They're voting very much with their feet to say to the government, actually, you know what, this isn't for us. And yes, the events, the dreadful events in Xinjiang are the trigger. But I think this is very much about a wider form of freedom.
And where does this leave the West, particularly here in London? Because we've got Rishi Sunak making a foreign policy speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet tonight. But I think he's talking about robust pragmatism in terms of foreign policy. What does that mean in terms of dealing with China?
Well, robust pragmatism sounds very much to me not all that dissimilar from the kind of language that George Osborne was using when we entered into the golden era, or as it's now referred to in government, the golden era. Look, China is a threat. It's a strange vagary of our current system that this government can't seem to admit that it's a threat. Tory MPs have come out today and said, look, China's a threat. It's threatening our values. It tore up our treaty in Hong Kong, and it's done an awful lot more than that. Yeah, there's this weird reality precisely because we are so dependent on China for imports, for investment, and for many other things that we can't seem to call a spade when it comes to this regime.
Samuel Armstrong, thanks very much indeed. And, of course, we'll continue to monitor events as they spread across those Chinese cities. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we're talking about Prime Minister making that speech tonight. What else is happening in Westminster? Let's get an update now with our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, fresh out of lobby. Tom, what have they been talking about today?
Yes, I'll tell you what, it was an extraordinarily long session of questioning of the Prime Minister's official spokesman. A lot of government business taking place this week, not least at a little bit later on this evening. The Christmas tree behind me will have its lights turned on by the Prime Minister here in Downing Street. But whilst that might be a relatively light item on his calendar for the next 7 days, there is a lot heavier to come. It's an incredibly busy set of events, meetings and indeed legislation as well. And there is a question out of quite how busy, how much is going on. And that question is there a bit of a reset already taking place in government? The Labour Party has been very conscious about trying to paint the Prime Minister as someone who is weak, as someone who bends with the wind, who's pushed around by different factions within his own party. Well, we might well start to see this week a Prime Minister who wants to be seen as acting a little bit more tough. A little bit later this week, the Home Secretary will be hosting a roundtable in Downing Street with police chiefs, focusing on what more can be done to crack down on the Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil-style protesters, where just a very few people can grind roads and indeed other parts of the country to a halt, can vandalise almost at will. What more can be done to crack down on those will be a theme later this week. But also, too, the Prime Minister will, of course, be addressing those serial rebellions that are taking place, not just on the planning bill, those who want to make it harder to build houses and those who want to make it easier to build wind farms, but also, of course, on the issue of asylum. And the Prime Minister emphasising that this is a priority for him too.
And it's interesting that the 50 names that signed this letter talking about trying to adapt the modern slavery legislation include David Davis and even Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, who we saw announce Rishi Sunak's successors in the leadership vote.
Yes, certainly. This is a letter that has been written by David Davis that the government has said it will look at very closely. The government is saying that this is a priority area and that they do want to explore the options within that letter. They won't commit any more than that. They won't commit to the sort of emergency legislation that is being asked of them, but certainly the idea that someone can come to the United Kingdom, claim they have been people trafficked, and then stay in the United Kingdom does seem a curious one. If you have been people trafficked from somewhere against your will, wouldn't you much rather go back to the place from which you came? That seems to be the logic in David Davis's letter, and it wasn't being entirely slapped down by the government today, but clearly some very difficult party management to come, and indeed some huge challenges that will be facing this government in the weeks and months ahead. Also discussed, of course, was this story of perhaps the army being brought in to drive ambulances amidst a winter of strike chaos. Now, the government emphasising no formal request has been made of that by the Health Department for the Ministry of Defence, but departments are able to request army support when it comes to industrial action from the Ministry of Defence, and that's a significant development.
OK, well, we'll watch and wait and see what happens on that. And, of course, suggestions that there may be some problems with power supply tomorrow, but we'll update everyone on that in a moment. For the moment, Tom, thank you for that. Staying with politics, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has been speaking to broadcasters too this morning, and he was asked about those cases of diphtheria at the Manston Migrant Processing Centre.
Did the health authorities know there were diphtheria cases at Manston before the facility was emptied?
Well, we vaccinated a range of people at Manston before they were moved, so that was part of the targeted action that UK HSA put in place. Clearly, within the population as a whole, it's very low risk because there's a very high uptake of vaccinations within the local population. But we're monitoring it closely, and that's why so many people were vaccinated. 500 were vaccinated before they left Manston.
And on that story, what's the risk to the general public? There's a story in the FT that migrants with diphtheria are being spread around the country without being screened. Is that a problem?
Well, the risk is very low, partly because there's very high uptake of vaccination within the British public in the first place, but also we had a targeted action of vaccinations at Manston, and so 500 people were vaccinated before they actually left Manston, and it's something that UK HSA are monitoring extremely closely, and that's why they took the targeted action that they did.
And the strikes. Is the army being called in to help run the strikes, and does that mean the negotiations are essentially over?
Well, no formal request has been made by the Department of Health to the military, but of course we will look as part of our normal contingency plans at a range of options. The priority for me is to continue the dialogue with the trade unions, with the RCN. I've been extremely clear that my door is open. They have raised a range of issues, not just pay, but also about working conditions, patient safety, and so I'm very happy to continue that dialogue with the RCN, but alongside that it's right that with NHSE colleagues, with hospital leaders, that we look at our contingency plans and ensure we're as best prepared as we can, recognising that there will be impacts on patients if the strikes go ahead.
Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, updating us here on GB News. Now, today marks 10 years of the government's Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative. Well, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has been hosting an international conference to mark that occasion. And he's announced a 3-year strategy to tackle sexual violence in conflict, backed by £12.5 million of new funding. Let's get more with our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who joins us now. And Catherine, of course, it's very apposite, given all the reports we're getting from Ukraine about sexual violence still being used effectively as a weapon in these conflicts.
Yes, absolutely. Despite the best efforts of the government and this initiative, rape and sexual violence in conflict zones is continuing unabated, and especially notable that it's happening in Europe, in the Ukraine, right now in the conflict with Russia. Horrific reports coming out of there. I won't give you the worst of them, but one, for instance, that a woman was raped, her husband was lying dead outside, her 4-year-old was sobbing in the next room. Another, that Russian soldiers some have been apparently encouraged by their partners back home to rape Ukrainian women and just use protection. Very, very shocking indeed. So today there is a two-day conference which has begun this morning with Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, and representatives from about 80 countries around the world have come to the Queen Elizabeth II Centre in Westminster, just around the corner from where I'm standing, to work on addressing this horrendous issue that has been going on, well, since the ancient Greeks, since time immemorial. So they have announced £12.5 million of new money for this 3-year programme. As you say, they're also working with the International Criminal Court on ways of using technology to help both gather evidence in terms of potentially using mobile phones with time and date stamps, to using virtual reality and video technology to make it easier for people bringing charges to give testimony. Of course, the majority of these crimes go unreported. Now, this is the second of these conferences. The last one was in 2014, and this is very much a British initiative, a way in which we can hold our heads up, started by the then Foreign Secretary William Hague and the Hollywood star Angelina Jolie, who has been talking this morning via video link. She's been very critical, saying that for all the words, for all the resolutions, that in fact not enough action has been taken. And certainly, while there is more help available for survivors, they very much use the term survivors rather than victims. And of course we know that not everybody who is victim of sexual abuse does in fact survive, but more support for survivors. But although James Cleverly was saying this morning that there can be no impunity, nowhere to hide, the reality is that convictions are very, very rare. The International Criminal Court has only actually convicted 2 people of rape in the last 20 years. So an absolute mountain to climb, but at least Britain is leading the way.
Indeed. Catherine, thanks very much for updating us on that. Well, let's break away now to the World Cup, and let's bring you that skyline once more of the scene in Doha, indicating that things are hotting up both on and off the pitch. Just to remind you, we've got the big clash tomorrow, Wales versus England at 7 p.m. A little cooler, of course, than the earlier matches that certainly Wales played at lunchtime. But it's going to be a big showdown. We're told that Welsh supporters will be enjoying some 6 tons of alcohol that's been moved to Qatar, worth £1 million. Let's go to Doha now and speak to our GB News reporter, Paul Hawkins. No connection, of course, with 6 tons of booze at all, because he's there in the souk, which is, well, pretty alcohol-free. This is an extraordinary admission by, I think, Rodri Williams, who's one of the sports presenters out there, who's also sort of marshalling the Welsh fans, because you can obviously get the alcohol in the hotel bars.
Yeah, absolutely. Hotel bars and fan zones, 2 of the places where you can get alcohol at the World Cup, and they sell them in these hotel bars in packages. So as we've mentioned before Wales' first game against Iran, you could pick up sort of 5 pints and a curry for 80 quid, and these are the kind of places that are selling it. And given that this could be Wales' last World Cup match for quite some time tomorrow, a lot of Wales fans thinking, you know, this is the only time we're going to appear at a World Cup, given the age of some of our best players. They'll probably be sinking a few beforehand in those bars. So I'm not surprised to hear that there are 6 tons of alcohol ready. In terms of the football today so far, we've had a 6-goal thriller between Serbia and Cameroon. Serbia going in 2-1 up at half-time in that one. Cameroon fighting back to draw 3-3. Really a result that's not good for either of those teams, because they lost both their opening matches. In just a moment, South Korea take on Uruguay. South Korea drew their first match. South Korea-Ghana. South Korea drew their first match. Ghana needs to win that one if they're to have any hopes of progressing to the next round. And later on, you can probably tell there's lots of gold, the famous golden green and blue of Brazil knocking around, because Brazil take on Switzerland at 7 o'clock 7 o'clock your time. That's 4 o'clock local time. And then after that, Luis Suarez's Uruguay take on Cristiano Ronaldo's Portugal, so that should be one worth looking out for. And then tomorrow it's the big one, England taking on Wales. A reminder of what's needed. Wales have to win. If they win and results go in their favour in the Iran-USA game, they can still qualify. England need to avoid losing 4-0 to Wales. They only need a point really to qualify to the next round. Both teams looking to fight to come back from those terrible performances in the last round of matches. This is what the England striker Marcus Rashford has had to say about playing Wales.
To be honest, we don't need fans to boo us for us to know that we've not played as well as we could have. I feel like it's a feeling that was mutual amongst the group, that we could have done better. It's not just the players that start the game. It's the full group. We train for 4 days leading up to the game. It's all of us. You do sometimes question, would you have changed things in the build up to the game? But that's natural. As players, we want to win as many games as we can.
Just some lines that have come out of England's training session today. They're holding a press conference later at 7 o'clock UK time. That'll be attended by Gareth Southgate and Vice-Captain Jordan Henderson. But we understand Ben White, Arsenal fullback, Arsenal defender, did not train today because he is ill. So we'll probably find out a little bit more about that in the press conference later on this evening. And in round about half an hour's time, there is a Wales press conference ahead of that huge clash with England tomorrow.
Yeah, 4-0, not much of an ask for them, really. But very quickly, Paul, I gather things are hotting up as well. The temperature's creeping up there.
Yeah, a little bit. It's a couple of degrees hotter today, so sort of 32, 33, or it was like that earlier today. It's now coming up to 4 o'clock local time. The sun will be gone in around 45 minutes, and then it'll be much cooler and much better. But and actually looking ahead at the 5-day forecast, I believe we're going to peak at around 25 degrees. So the temperatures over the next sort of week or two are going to slowly start to dip, which should make those that are playing during the day make it a little bit easier for them.
Indeed. Paul, as ever, thanks for updating us. Back to you throughout the afternoon, of course. Well, as we're discussing a pivotal World Cup game between both Wales and England, our Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley now joins us from North Ferriby Football Club, the Grassroots game, of course. Anna, clearly they'll be looking carefully at not quite such a sunny scene there in Yorkshire as we've seen in Doha. What are they expecting in terms of the scoreline tomorrow?
Yes, it's a little bit cloudier and colder here, that's for sure. But there's a lot of excitement ahead of that big game tomorrow, Wales versus England. This is a Grassroots club. It's a community football club. They've got members from age of 6 all the way up to 74. And I'm delighted to be joined by Les Hare. He's the chairman here. Les, what have you made of the World Cup so far and how are you feeling for tomorrow?
It's been an extraordinary competition so far. An awful lot of shock results, a lot of interest for a lot of people, which is great because it just gives everybody something else to look at. And I'm expecting a result tomorrow, obviously, for England, no doubt at all.
And how do you think they've been playing and have you got a prediction?
Well, I think obviously we've had 2 games, we've had a really, really good encounter and scored 6, and then, of course, something that went very flat in the game against the USA. They all know what they've got to do tomorrow, and I'm expecting a win and, potentially a good 2-0 win will be very nice.
And what has the World Cup done for grassroots football clubs like this one?
It's amazing, actually, because effectively speaking, indirectly, of course, because all of the Premier League and Championship matches are off, a lot of people are looking for a football fix and they're coming to non-league grounds, which is fantastic. And for a lot of armchair supporters, it's just wonderful, isn't it? They're getting the opportunity to watch football almost 24/7.
Definitely. And what does it do for the community? Because there's more than 350 members that you've got here.
Yeah, those 350 are people who are playing football, and of course, obviously, a lot of them, they want to take in the atmosphere. So when England were playing on the 2 occasions on the television so far, our clubhouse has been absolutely full of people, complete families all the way through, quite literally. So a lot of them come here instead of going up to the pubs.
Thank you so much, Les. So that's a prediction for an England win in that game tomorrow against Wales.
OK, thanks very much indeed. As we say, slightly different scene to Doha, but still exciting, of course, when they're all out on the pitch there. Thanks very much. Well, let's just briefly return to that growing rebellion, if that's the right word. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak facing problems over illegal migrants with a letter, some 50 MPs having signed it. Let's speak to someone now throughout his time in Parliament has been vocal on the issue, Conservative MP for Ashfield, Lee Anderson. Thanks very much for joining us once more, Sir Anderson. 50 letters, 50 signatories to the letter. I gather you're not one of them, though.
No, I'm not one of the signatories of the letter, my friend. I mean, I agree with the contents of the letter, of course I do, and I also believe in swift deportation of these people who's crossing the channel. But, you know, I'm a little bit fed up now of signing letters. I've been signing letters for the last 2.5, 3 years on this subject, and nothing's changed. We've just brought the Nationality and Borders Bill in. This sort of problem should have been wrapped up in that. It's not being, and yet again, what we're doing, we're sending another strongly worded letter to the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, which will mean absolutely nothing. It's time for strong action, not words.
However, looking at the signatories, it includes David Davis and Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 committee. So, therefore, it's got quite a bit of weight for the Prime Minister. Surely you'll have to consider this issue on modern slavery and perhaps changing the law on that.
You know, I agree with the letter. I agree with everything that's in the letter. My problem is we're sending too many letters. This is obvious stuff, this is. And we should have sorted this out when we brought in the Nationality and Borders Bill. We've not. And now we're scratching our heads, wondering why tens of thousands of people are still coming in. 12,000 Albanians are coming in. 50% of those are being granted asylum. They're not coming here to contribute towards our economy. Well, they are, but we know what sort of economy they're going to be contributing to. Look, I'm just angry. I'm fed up. I'm sick to the back teeth of sending letters to number 10 and nothing gets done, so I don't see the point. I'll keep rattling on, my friend, in the chamber and doing that and putting awkward questions to the Prime Minister and the Home Office. That's what I'll be doing to sort this mess out.
And what will your next awkward question be? Because as Mark White was reporting here in GB News, another 6 boats today, and this comes after we understand there was this new deal with the French to actually intercept on their side of the channel.
Well, look, I mean, I'm in the camp that says we shouldn't be giving France any money. It seems that the more money we give France, the more migrants can come over. I think they must be on some sort of bonus system at the moment. Look, you know, awkward questions every single day I'm in that chamber. Depends who's at the dispatch box. I'll take each day as it comes. But my question remains the same. Why are we allowing these people in? Why are we ferrying them straight to a 4-star hotel? And why are we dispersing them into communities where simply the local services just can't cope with them? It's absolute nonsense. We've let the country down. We've reneged on our promise to control our borders. And like I say, letters are all well and good, and I agree with what's in the letter, but letters aren't achieving anything.
OK, Lee Anderson, as ever, thanks for your time here on GB News. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's bring you some breaking news we're getting. The Sports Minister, Stuart Andrews, says he will wear a rainbow-coloured armband when he attends tomorrow's clash between England and Wales. Mr Andrews, who is gay, says, I will most definitely be wearing a One Love armband. I want to show support. I was delighted to see that the German minister who attended a recent match has worn it too. I think it's important to do so. I think it's been really unfair on the England and Welsh teams that at the 11th hour they were stopped by FIFA from doing it. We'll see, of course, if he is allowed. More to come in the next 2 hours, but let's get an update on the latest news headlines with Rosie.
A very good morning to you. It is 1 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. More than 50 Conservative MPs have signed a letter urging the Prime Minister to introduce emergency legislation to ease the migrant crisis. The group says, firstly, people should be more rapidly returned to the safe countries that they've come from. And secondly, when claims are made that people have unwillingly been trafficked to the UK, they should be sent back without objection. MPs, including Sir Graham Brady and Esther McVeigh, say the amendments would be a strong deterrent for those thinking of crossing the Channel. GB News sources say more than 350 people were intercepted on 7 small boats this morning. The government's considering asking the armed forces to stand in for hospital staff during possible strikes this winter. Health officials are drawing up contingencies to cover frontline workers as ambulance drivers and paramedics consider joining nurses in their upcoming walkouts. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says they're concerned about the impact the action could have on patients.
Well, no formal request has been made by the Department of Health to the military, but of course we will look as part of our normal contingency plans at a range of options. The priority for me is to continue the dialogue with the trade unions, with the RCN. I've been extremely clear that my door is open. They have raised a range of issues, not just pay, but also about working conditions, patient safety, and so I'm very happy to continue that dialogue.
National Grid could pay households to cut their power usage for the first time tomorrow in a bid to avoid blackouts. The operator's warning outages at nuclear power plants in France has put pressure on supplies, and they might need to use its new demand flexibility service. Households will be asked to reduce their usage at certain times in the day, and they'll be paid for any reductions they make. The government's launching a £1 billion scheme to make middle-income homes more energy efficient. The 3-year scheme will see hundreds of thousands of homes receive loft and cavity wall insulation from this spring. Households that don't currently get support to upgrade their homes will be prioritised. A fifth of the funding will be set aside for the most vulnerable. The Business Secretary, Grant Shapps, told us the measures will help households reduce their energy consumption.
This £1 billion, which is in addition to a lot more money that's been provided previously, is to allow anyone in any kind of housing, could be private rent, it could be their own home, could be social housing, to improve the property in order to make sure that it meets those higher standards. And that will save people, quite a lot of money.
The Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, told GB News Labour wants to insulate 19 million homes as soon as possible.
It's about 10 years too late. I mean, this should have been a quick early win for the government, reducing people's fuel bills and doing the right thing by the environment. I mean, it's a win-win. Why has it taken so long? This government have neither the ambition or the direction. Of course, I welcome when they come a little bit onto our territory, whether it's a windfall tax or greater energy efficiency ambition, but they've got nowhere near the comprehensive programme they need to get this country onto the right path.
In China, authorities have put up barriers around parts of Shanghai following a weekend of protests against strict COVID restrictions. 10 people were killed in a tower block fire that sparked civil unrest across the country. Demonstrators claim that coronavirus measures in place may have hindered people's escape from the fire. They're now calling for President Xi Jinping's resignation. Human rights campaigner Luke de Pulford told GB News the protesters will continue until their demands are heard.
There are many things all combining here. I think it's partly the lack of information that people within China have about other people's COVID policies outside of China. That's angered people a lot. It's the Urumqi fire, which was, really terrible. The reports are that they couldn't get out because the doors themselves have been barricaded by the authorities as a part of the extremely restrictive COVID measures. But yes, of course, it's the economy. People are going into their 4th year of this stuff now in China. They've had enough of it.
Amidst the chaos in Shanghai, a BBC journalist was arrested, which the UK Foreign Secretary has described as deeply disturbing.
Hey, are you okay? Barry, call the consulate now.
Well, moments before that, Ed Lawrence was handcuffed by police. The BBC says he was beaten, kicked and held for several hours before being released. The broadcaster says the Chinese authorities claim they arrested him for his own good in case he caught COVID from the crowd. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more as it develops. Now back to Mark.
Rosie, thanks very much. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and this is what's coming up in this hour. With hundreds more illegal migrants arriving in Britain across the English Channel, GB News understands that at least 7 boats now have been intercepted after weather conditions improved overnight. We'll have the latest from our security editor, Mark White. Also, the NHS set to be paralysed by winter strikes. The army is now on standby to help out. Rishi Sunak says he wants vaccine-style task forces to tackle things such as cancer and obesity in the future. We'll hear the take of a former NHS Trust chairman. And live in Doha, ahead of the World Cup clashes featuring Brazil, Portugal and Uruguay, as Britain's sports minister, who is gay, says he will be wearing the Rainbow One Love armband at tomorrow's game between England and Wales. Will he be allowed to get away with it? Tell us what you think on all the day's stories. Email us gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's coming up in a moment. So hundreds more people have begun to arrive across the English Channel in those small boats after the bad weather of the past fortnight had prevented the sailings. At least 7 small boats we're now being told being intercepted in the Channel so far today after the weather conditions improved overnight. Well, this comes as around 50 Conservative MPs have written to the Prime Minister urging him to introduce emergency legislation to return Albanians and others to their home countries more rapidly. Health officials also expected to confirm that dozens of migrants suffering from diphtheria were moved from the Manston Processing Centre in Kent to hotels across the country. Our Home and Security editor Mark White brings us the latest.
Just after first light, the Border Force vessel Typhoon could be seen approaching Dover Harbour, with the first of hundreds of migrants picked up in the Channel this morning. Around 50 people were taken on board Typhoon for the journey to the Dover Processing Centre. For more than a fortnight, bad weather has largely scuppered attempts by the criminal gangs to push boats off the beaches of northwestern France. In fact, since the 13th of November, just one small boat with 36 people on board has made it across the English Channel. But conditions are now flat calm, meaning some of the thousands who've been waiting in various makeshift camps around Dunkirk and Calais are being funneled down to the beaches and onto the boats. Increasingly frustrated at the government's seeming inability to get a grip on the crisis, around 50 Conservative MPs have written to the Prime Minister demanding he introduce emergency legislation to deal in particular with the number of Albanians arriving in small boats. They want all Albanians rapidly removed back to their own country, and any who claim to have been trafficked also returned home.
Are you concerned about the spread of other diseases, Home Secretary?
It is yet more pressure on the Home Secretary, already dealing with the consequences of dozens of migrants who were infected with diphtheria being farmed out to various hotels around the UK, even though they were highly infectious. It is a growing health crisis within a migrant crisis that shows no sign of slowing. With good weather conditions throughout most of this week, authorities are braced for the possibility that thousands more could cross the Channel in the days ahead. Mark White, GB News.
Let's get the very latest live now with Mark joining us in the studio. Mark, last hour you were telling us 6 boats, now it's up to 7, as we could see from those pictures, that flat calm. Clearly they're making a run for it, but the significance is this is coming after we supposedly have signed a new deal with the French to prevent this happening.
Yeah, and it may be that the French have stopped quite a number of people getting off of the beaches around Dunkirk and Calais. But the trouble is, they can prevent them one day, they'll just regroup, come back and try again the next day. We saw the same with the lorries, with people going into the backs of lorries at Calais. Yeah, they would be pulled off the lorries, but they would just go away and come back and try again the next day. Over and over until they eventually got through. So all you're doing, I think, is often just postponing the inevitable, which is that these people will eventually get on small boats and across the Channel at some point.
Until we see another bad piece of significant bad weather coming up, blowing up, of course. Now, the other aspect is that we've got this political storm brewing up at home. 50 senior MPs, David Davis, Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 committee, saying you've got to change the law to stop the economic migrants coming, Albanians, as we've heard, and other nationalities, i.e. those not really seeking asylum for political reasons.
Yes, these MPs actually believe that the government's just tying itself in knots over this issue, and it's really, they claim, quite simple at a fundamental level when you're dealing with Albanians coming from a country that is a peaceful nation that on the face of it wouldn't support a claim to asylum. There may be some sort of individual cases that do qualify, but the vast majority, the government believes, and certainly these MPs believe, would not support an asylum claim. So what they say is introduce emergency legislation that can ensure that those people who come across have a speedy, cursory determination of whether they should fit that requirement for asylum. If they don't, get them on the next plane back to Tirana. Equally, those who claim to have been trafficked, which is a very significant proportion of those coming from Albania, because we know that they're being schooled by the criminal gangs who are pushing them across the channel to say that they're victims of modern slavery. Then they enter a tandem system alongside the asylum system, where actually to prove that you're a victim of trafficking, the threshold is quite low, and many of those individuals end up being allowed to stay. Well, the argument from the MPs, which on the face of it seems to make some sense, is if you are claiming you have been forcibly taken from your home and sent across the channel, surely you would welcome a return back to your home.
Good point, yeah.
So
However,
that's the point they make there.
One can see all the legal barriers with appeal processes and so on, as we've seen with people claiming asylum. Lots of those were housed at Manston. That is now empty. They were moved on. But now there's real concern about the cases of diphtheria that maybe were detected or were known about. And those people have been moved on to hotels. Now, Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, saying there's not really much of a health threat with that, but clearly still concerning for many local authorities.
No, I mean, you know, it's perfectly obvious there is certainly a health threat out there, because you have dozens, we're told upwards of 50 people who have been in Manston who perhaps were not symptomatic at the time, but then were farmed out to hotels across the country who have become symptomatic, who've tested positive for this potentially deadly disease. Who are a risk to the wider community. OK, not necessarily those who've already been inoculated, which is the majority of people in this country.
Because we had that national service, sort of 6 jabs in one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But remember, millions of people have come to the UK over the past 20 years or so who will have come from countries that perhaps do not have the diphtheria vaccination as part of their inoculation regime. So they would be at risk, and any of those people contracting that disease are going to require medical intervention, potentially hospitalisation, at a time when the health service, at this time of year, as we know, struggles anyway with flu. They're dealing with COVID.
And we're already talking about the army being brought in to help drive ambulances and so on. So
because the strike's looming, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All of
we'll keep an eye on that, of course, and see what happens in terms of those number of cases as they're detected. Mark, for the moment, thanks very much for updating us on that. Well, as we were discussing, more than 50 Tory MPs signing that letter to demand change to the modern slavery laws. It would help to return the asylum seekers home, as Mark says. Now, if the Prime Minister was to sign that emergency legislation, it should help cut the number of boats that have been crossing the channel. And its senior party figures, including David Davis, Liam Fox, Esther McVeigh, of course, GB News presenter, and Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 committee, who've all put their names to that letter. But there's also increasing pressure on the Prime Minister, with he's facing calls to lift the ban on onshore wind farms. Now, former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, part of a group of MPs calling for that ban to be lifted. Meanwhile, Business Secretary Grant Shapps hinting that Mr Sunak could have a U-turn on the ban, rather. Let's talk to our political reporter, Olivia Utley. Quite a roundabout story there, Olivia. We got to it in the end, but clearly there are growing pressures on Rishi Sunak from all these backbenchers.
Absolutely, and these 50 MPs signing a letter about the Albanian migrants is a big problem for Rishi Sunak because, as you mentioned, they are big-hitting beasts in the Tory party. Liam Fox, Graham Brady, who rarely speaks up on these sort of issues, our very own Esther McVeigh, of course. And as far as it seems, the legislation which they propose would make an awful lot of sense. At the moment, you've got a third of all migrants coming across in small boats are Albanians. Albania is a safe country. Many of those are claiming to be victims of modern slavery. And under the current law, even though the vast majority of them aren't actually accepted for asylum in the end, you've got 420 days on average while their claims are being processed, while they stay in the UK, which, as David puts it, ends up paralysing the system. And as Mark White mentioned there in his report, it would seem to make a lot of sense that if you've got people who are saying that they are victims of modern slavery, they claim that they've been trafficked over here, then rather than than keeping them here for 420 days while their applications are processed, surely the kindest, most humane thing to do would be to send them straight back. So that's the argument that David Davis and the rest of those 50 MPs are going to use to try and push this amendment to the legislation through. But we know that that's going to be quite difficult because the modern slavery legislation was Theresa May's sort of crowning jewel of her premiership, and she made it pretty watertight. So trying to change that legislation is going to be pretty hard. It'll be sort of like reversing a big ferry. And although there is definitely political will for it among the backbenchers, the government, as we've discussed, has such a lot on its plate at the moment. Getting that through, getting that amendment through would be very tough indeed.
Yeah, well, talking about things on their plate, clearly we're looking at this issue of the onshore wind farms as well. Grant Shapps, the business secretary, saying it's too strong to call it all a rebellion, but clearly there's growing unease on the backbenches and also the confidence they can go public with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon Clarke, for example, when he was Levelling Up Secretary, was perfectly happy with the onshore wind farm ban and has now changed his tune and is leading this whole rebellion, which does show that these backbenchers now feel like they have the licence, they feel like they have the power. They don't feel like Rishi Sunak is strong enough to be able to resist calls like this. And yes, that there is an argument. Grant Shapps makes it quite sort of neatly that it's not, he wouldn't go as far as to call it a rebellion, because what all of the Conservatives want is to make sure that there's community consent. And what Simon Clarke is saying is that his bill would mean that there was community consent for wind farms, whereas if Labour end up pushing it through, that community consent disappears. But we know that that's not how quite a lot of MPs who have constituents who live in areas where there could be a wind farm, that's not how they feel. Basically what they want is not to have wind farms at all. So yes, it's true that it might not be a full-scale rebellion now, but it feels like that could be another problem coming down the line for an increasingly beleaguered Prime Minister.
Indeed. Olivia, for the moment, thanks for updating us there at Westminster. Well, as we've been discussing, tensions rising over the increase in migrants, especially those being housed in hotels and then needing access to local services such as healthcare. Well, the residents of Skegness, a busy tourist hub on the Lincolnshire coast, have demanded answers from their local MP. Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, sent us this from their town hall meeting.
A community at boiling point, the local MP trying to cool tensions.
They are from some of the most war-torn and troubled.
Despite sitting on Britain's edge, Skegness is at the centre of the migrant row.
I'm passionate about, the residents that live here, and a lot of us aren't feeling very safe.
We don't know the backgrounds of these people, where they're from, what have they done, what are they actually running away from.
They're getting free medical treatment. We can't get a doctor in Skegness.
Not everyone is worried. One Ukrainian woman questioned why she was welcomed so warmly while these men are met with hostility. 5 hotels are being used by more than 200 asylum seekers, while the Home Office struggles with processing delays and a lack of accommodation. Skegness MP Matt Warman says the future is uncertain, but he understands people's concern.
When they say, for instance, we want to know when a hotel might stop being used, I think it's right that, as I say, I'm honest and say, look, I can't give you a date right now. What I can do is apply the maximum pressure to the Home Secretary, to the government. This is a situation that those people themselves say is not acceptable. We've got to move on from it as quickly as possible.
More than 2 million visitors descend on Skegness each year, but out of season, it's quiet and hotels are largely empty.
The Home Office says that accommodation is needed for 37,000 asylum seekers here in the UK.
Some locals say trade is already turning away from the town. Danny and Adrian are on the town council.
Without tourism, it's the major industry that we have on the coast, tourists. And if we lose the tourists, then Skegness will be in trouble.
These people that are here, unfortunately, have just come through, perilous waters to get to our shores with no money. So they can't support an economy that struggles for over half the year.
The local district council, East Lindsey, declined to comment, saying it's a Home Office issue. But in cases where asylum is granted, the council could face additional pressures, according to the leader, Craig Leyland, speaking of his own accord.
We would say there's a balance between what we can do locally in terms of the numbers that we can support and how that goes forward. That's our concern, is that balance. We don't want that to tip over into community cohesion problems when that balance tips the wrong way.
In a statement, the Home Office said that the use of hotels to house asylum seekers is unacceptable and that it's a temporary solution. The UK hit its highest levels of net migration this week, despite Brexit and border promises. In Skegness, a town with the highest Leave vote in the country, referendum wishes and reality are very different things. Will Hollis for GB News in Skegness.
And from one seaside resort to another, this is the picture of Doha, which is a little sunnier than Skegness. As you can see, Paul Hawkins, our correspondent there, telling us temperatures in the high 20s, but we are being told those temperatures will start to dip in the coming days. Good news, of course, for both Wales and England as they face off tomorrow. We're being told that Welsh supporters have some 6 tonnes of alcohol that's been delivered, worth £1 million. That's now locked firmly away in the various hotel bars ready for the kick-off tomorrow. The kick-off today, South Korea and Ghana in action, currently 0-0. And then the favourites for the tournament, Brazil, facing Switzerland at 4 o'clock. And the man of the moment, of course, Cristiano Ronaldo, in action for Portugal tonight at 7, with Uruguay, with what promises to be perhaps a feisty affair. More coming up from Doha with Paul a little later. Also coming up, Matt Hancock out of I'm a Celebrity last night in 3rd place. But we're asking, did he actually steal the show? Back in a moment.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
So, Matt Hancock. Sigh. Yes, out of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. He got out eventually. Lots predicting, of course, he'd be first out, winning 0 votes. But he obviously did something right, managing to take 3rd place for himself. Run-up Hollyoaks star Owen Warner and the Queen of the Jungle, the public's favourite, Lioness Jill Scott. However, did Matt Hancock steal the show? The MP defending his decision to take time off constituency work to show, as he said, politicians are human beings. He completed 10 Bush Tucker trials while in the jungle, performing well and getting stuck in, which increased his popularity with some fellow contestants. Well, joining us now to reflect on whether, in fact, he's really won the overall battle, showbiz journalist Ellie Phillips. Thank you for joining us, Ellie. I'm afraid I wasn't sort of part of the audience, although my wife was. And I think the reaction was, you know, he did pretty well facing up to all the trials, but just found him a bit annoying.
Yeah, I think he came across as that kind of odd, a bit awkward uncle that's at the family Christmas, you know. I think that's kind of how people have taken to him. And I think a lot of the celebrities that were in there with him actually said that they had to mentally separate Matt, the man in the jungle, from Matt Hancock, who did all those awful things during the pandemic. And that was the only way that they could get through. And I think there was quite a shock that he did so well in terms of coming third, because when he went into the jungle, he was actually the bookies' favourite to be the first voted out. So, you know, he did turn around opinion in terms of he got through all the trials. He really got stuck into the trials and did very well when it came to that. He came across as an okay bloke, but I think again you have to separate that from everything that we know that he did during the pandemic. You know, his time as health secretary and the bad things that we know him by. And another interesting thing that's come up through this is the discussion of TikTok. His team massively used that platform to galvanise support for him. And TikTok's got a really young audience. You know, these are people who perhaps might not know that the things that he did have, you know, an awful impact on, and you know, one that can't be changed on the whole country, and the things that he did during the pandemic. And they just see him, like I said, as this dodgy uncle who dances a bit, you know, badly and has a bit of a laugh and is someone we can like laugh at. So I think that helped him a lot.
I understand there has been some discussion, though, as to whether there was some PR operation being launched with all those TikTok votes. And we knew, of course, some of the MPs were also voting. And this is part of the reflection about all these things like Big Brother and so on. It is your public perception necessarily, not who you are, really.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both when it comes to this. He went in there and we only knew Matt Hancock as the things that he did during the pandemic, the person we saw on television in that official capacity. But I think the thing that underlies all of this, and yes, we got to know Matt the bloke, but equally Matt the bloke who went in there should be in Parliament working. We are paying him to do a job that he has sacked off for the past month. And yes, you know, he's been stripped, you know, he's stripped his whip and all of that, but ultimately, will he come back from this and continue with a political career? Who would have confidence in him as a politician when he's happy to just drop it all when a reality show comes along? So there is this underlying context that kind of weaves its way through what we see on screen in the jungle.
And do you think there's an element of the production team maybe who thought it's great to see this man humiliated, but he seemed to sort of ride above it, pretty thick-skinned?
He was very thick-skinned, and I genuinely think, you know, he did 10 trials, which is the most ever in British history with that. You know, Janice Dickinson was the last person to do that back in 2007, I think. She had 8 trials, so people did really want to see him suffer, but then it wasn't bothering him at all, so it kind of became redundant trying to put him through these trials. The only good thing that came out of it in terms of a funny, entertaining side of things were when, you know, there's a toad on his head and that gets turned into a meme on social media. So there were funny, entertaining sides of it, and I think I've got to say hats off to the bookers, because as much as I don't agree that he should have gone in when he's, you know, Parliament is sitting, from a booking point of view, for the entertainment value for the show, they really did well to get him, because he's all we're talking about now. You know, Jill Scott won, she's a lioness, she's incredible, she's, you know, a proud lesbian, all these incredible things, and yet we're here talking about Matt Hancock.
Yeah, I was the very point I was about to make. Let's maybe have a round of applause for Jill Scott, a lioness, successful second time round as the Queen of the Jungle, as well as Queen of the Pitch, of course. So she was the true winner.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely adore her. It would have been a travesty had she not won. She represented everything that's good about people, that's good about British people. And I think, you know, if she'd have lost to Matt Hancock, it would have felt like an absolute injustice. So, you know, the right winner won in the end.
Even though a geography teacher might be a bit embarrassed. And anyway, Ellie, thank you very much indeed for your reaction to that. Thanks for joining us. Rishi Sunak announcing £113 million to help the biggest health issues facing the NHS. What are they? We'll be updating you in a moment. First, the news headlines with Rosie.
It's 1:31. Good afternoon. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. More than 50 Conservative MPs have signed a letter urging the Prime Minister to change modern slavery laws to ease the migrant crisis. The group, including former cabinet ministers, says migrants they believe are bogus asylum seekers who claim to be the victims of trafficking can't object to being returned to their home country. GB News has learnt that at least 7 small boats with around 50 people on board each have been intercepted in the Channel and have been taken to Dover for processing. National Grid could pay households to cut their power usage for the first time tomorrow in a bid to avoid blackouts. The operator's warning outages at a nuclear power plant in France has put pressure on supplies. It might need to use its new demand flexibility service. Households may be asked to reduce their usage at certain times in the day and will be paid for any reductions they make. A decision is expected in around an hour's time, and we'll bring it to you here. The government's considering asking the armed forces to stand in for hospital staff during possible strikes this winter. Health officials are drawing up contingencies to cover frontline workers as ambulance drivers and paramedics consider joining nurses in their upcoming walkouts. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says they're concerned about the impact the action could have on patients.
Well, no formal request has been made by the Department of Health to the military, but of course we will look as part of our normal contingency plans at a range of options. The priority for me is to continue the dialogue with the trade unions, with the RCN. I've been extremely clear that my door is open. They have raised a range of issues, not just pay, but also about working conditions, patient safety, and so I'm very happy to continue that dialogue.
The government's launching a £1 billion scheme to make middle-income homes more energy efficient. The 3-year scheme will see hundreds of thousands of homes receive loft and cavity wall insulation from the spring. Households that don't currently get support to upgrade their homes will be prioritised, while a fifth of the funding will be set aside for the most vulnerable. We're on your TV, online, DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2082 and €1.1546. The price of gold is £1,452.65 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,447 points.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking. My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narinda.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, the Prime Minister has announced more than £113 million to address 4 of the biggest health issues facing the NHS: cancer, obesity, mental health and addiction. Well, those healthcare missions will be each led now by an independent expert, we're being told. The Prime Minister hopes the blueprint inspired by the COVID vaccine rollout and investment in new technologies and research could help to combat the issues. Meanwhile, another challenge facing the NHS, of course, the strikes upcoming, being suggested now the government are considering to ask the Army to step in under contingency plans to fill gaps in frontline services. Well, we're joined now by former NHS Trust Chairman Roy Lilly. Roy, thanks for joining us once more. Your reaction first to this news about the Army being brought in. I mean, you've been there before with contingency planning. Is this something that is always on standby, or are we perhaps facing real problems this winter?
Well, we're certainly facing real problems, but the ability for the Department of Health to call on the Ministry of Defence as a contingency or for real problems has always been there. It's part of the government's emergency planning. Quite what they'll do, I don't know. I mean, quite a lot of the Army does have, of course, the Royal Army Medical Corps, but a lot of them are reservists, and a lot of them are already working in hospitals. So, for example, Frimley Park Hospital in Surrey has what used to be the Cambridge Military Hospital staff working side by side. So it won't make a huge deal of difference in terms of what's available. If the paramedics go on strike, then certainly they will be able to drive ambulances and things like that. But it will make a small difference, I think, is the answer.
OK, now looking at this plan, £113 million for research and the blueprint from the vaccine rollout on COVID. Does that make sense to you?
Well, look, I mean, I really don't want to sound churlish here. And, you know, if ever there's any money for the NHS, I'm always in the front of the queue. But, you know, 30 million each for cancer, obesity, mental health and you know, whatever, I forget whatever the other one is now. But it's I mean, firstly, it's a tiny amount of money. Secondly, things like obesity are a kind of lifetime problem. Mental health, the big problem we got in mental health is there aren't enough staff in mental health, not enough nurses, not enough psychiatrists, a lot of them have left. So if you look at all these problems, these are all long-range problems. Now, look, a fresh pair of eyes coming in from the outside. I mean, certainly the vaccine rollout was a huge success with Kate Bingham, and perhaps she can work her magic here. But my kind of guess is that this is really more of a public relations stunt. I mean, the NHS, we've got, I mean, how many times have I been on this channel talking about ambulances queuing around the block, waiting times now nudging 8 million? I mean, the NHS problems are not in a long-range, longitudinal study of childhood obesity. The NHS problems are getting your granny a hip operation next week.
And I'm just wondering if, looking at the blueprint, where they're talking about a panel looking at independent experts being brought in, whether a lot of this money will just be swallowed up with actually paying quite handsome salaries to these people.
Well, you know, like I said, I don't want to be churlish. I don't want to be mean-minded. You know, bring the cash, the NHS will spend it. But in terms of outcomes, what are the outcomes? Will we live long enough to see what they are? And actually, you know what? There's a strike in 10 days' time. We really should be focusing on that.
Right. Roy, as ever, thanks for bringing us your view on health issues of the day. Thanks for joining us on GB News.
Pleasure.
Just to update you on the World Cup. Ghana 2, South Korea 0 now. So that's the latest in Doha. We'll be catching up with Paul Hawkins, our correspondent there, shortly. But first, let's reflect that with 91% of UK households now reporting an increase in the cost of living, times are tough for so many now. Well, the Business Secretary, Grant Shapps, told us this morning the government still has solutions ahead, but that they need more time to implement them. Despite that, many people across the country facing the prospect of limited heating or sky-high bills. Well, a Burnley-based organisation now, DEFRA, is doing what it can to help those who are struggling during the coldest months of the year, as our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper reports.
Freezing cold with empty bellies. That's the reality for so many people as the cost of living crisis continues to bite.
This particular meal would be roughly probably £1.10 per person, and that's for 2 meals. We've cut it down to roughly 2 meals a day. We don't have a lunch.
Every time you go out to the shop, I'll get a basket of things and I think this will only be so much, and it ends up being nearly double, and it's crazy. The prices are just going out of control.
But it isn't just the rising cost of food that people are having to contend with. Prices are rising across the board.
The boiler's been packed up and we needed it. That became a problem because we couldn't afford it.
We're not in a position to be able to just go out and buy a new boiler. It's terribly cold.
Thankfully, help was at hand for the Hartleys in the form of DEFA.
We are installing a brand new boiler, okay.
Established in 2017, DEFA is a community initiative which supports the elderly and vulnerable.
We don't just deliver a service, we deliver a life-saving initiative that puts food on the table, electric and gas on the meters. It delivers heating, hot water. It delivers to the people a lifeline that they need now more than ever.
With over 11,000 members, DEFA doesn't just support its local area of Burnley, it helps people right across the UK.
We ask people to apply for help, so they come either they ring us up or they email us, we'll go and see them. Instead of us having red tape and brick walls and hurdles to dive over all the time, we just have that basic need of getting information off them that's very basic on who they are, and then we put that plan in place.
When they began to struggle on their income of just over £1,000 per month between them, Keith and Anne reached out to DEFA for help.
Being without a boiler over the Christmas period would have been extremely cold. And, well, it looks like we're going to be in a position to be warm now.
He's an absolute angel. Absolute angel.
In these incredibly tough times, many people will have no choice but to fall back on the support of others. Fortunately, initiatives like DEFA are doing what they can to catch them. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Helping hand. Now, a teenager has been arrested in the inquiry into the fatal stabbings of two 16-year-old boys in south-east London. Cian Solanke was found with stab wounds at Thamesmead. Charlie Bertolo discovered in Abbey Wood on Saturday night. Well, the police say they're treating the two incidents as being linked. Both of the boys pronounced dead, with murder investigations then launched. Well, detectives are appealing to the public for any help to build a picture of what happened. Joining us now is Chris Hobbs, a former Met police officer. Chris, it's another tragic killing of youngsters in the capital, and the local MP saying the community is in shock. It's interesting, however, that detectives are saying so early that they believe the two deaths are linked.
Well, it is, and we still don't know too much about what's happened, whether it is gang-related. The two lads, you can't necessarily say that they were involved in a gang. They could have been wrong place, wrong time. It could have been something they've done to disrespect a gang, which often leads to tragic events. I think basically the whole problem of knife crime, gang-related violence is a massive one. Now, knife crime killings are down this year in terms of teenagers in London, which is good. A huge amount of work has gone in. A lot of it is stop and search. A lot of it is controversial. But huge challenges ahead. And I don't think really the public generally realise the extent of the issues surrounding gangs across London and other major cities. And of course, it's spread out now even into country areas. So there's a huge challenge, one that the police need to tackle, but so do communities, and so do those activists that constantly criticise the police. Everyone needs to get their act together, work together, and try and do something about this to prevent these tragedies.
Yeah, as you say, no indication that either of these two boys was involved in any kind of gang activity, but that has been a concern. And as you say, the fact that so many youngsters are carrying knives, whether they believe it's for their own safety in self-defence or as an offensive weapon, I mean, what more can be done apart from stop and search initiatives and making the penalties even tougher?
I think there needs to be a greater realisation amongst the public as to the extent of gang culture. It is absolutely massive. These gang leaders, often drill rappers, have followings of hundreds of thousands of people. Their influence on youth culture is absolutely massive. So I think that needs to be understood and acknowledged. And then there needs to be this community cooperation, and you need to get officers out, obviously, in the communities. Community policing needs to be re-established.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do we come back to that old chestnut, the Bobby on the beat, that local intelligence with the policeman knowing about what's going on and who's involved is the real key?
It is important, but as your last speaker, the one talking about the health service, police officers spend huge swathes of time dealing with non-crime issues. They're not out in communities. Massive amounts of time with mental health, for example.
And obviously that eats into the availability of getting personnel out on the streets. Chris, as ever, thanks for bringing us your reaction to that. And, of course, we'll follow the investigation as it unravels or unveils, of course. Thank you very much indeed. Let's take you back to Doha. Currently, we are being told Ghana 2-0 up on South Korea. But this is the skyline in Doha, where our correspondent... Paul's saying it's in the high 20s at the moment, of course, the heat of the day, but temperatures are due to dip in the days ahead, which will be good news, of course, for Wales and England, meeting tomorrow at 7 o'clock. In terms of today later, Brazil, well used to the heat, of course, facing Switzerland at 4 p.m. Brazil, the favourites, remember. And the man of the moment, Cristiano Ronaldo, in action for Portugal tonight at 7, taking on Uruguay in what could be a feisty affair. But talking of feisty affairs, we're told 6 tonnes of alcohol worth £1 million delivered to Qatar for tomorrow's game. That will be in the hotel, bars and restaurants, not out on the streets, of course, because of the restrictions. But let's get the very latest now with our reporter out there, Paul Hawkins. And Paul, we've got some pretty important games underway. Brazil, I guess, will be the real glamour game a little later.
Yeah, it absolutely will. It always is, isn't it, for the neutrals? Everyone wants to see Brazil play, although they will be without Neymar this time. He's got an ankle injury, so he's missing this game and the next one. I've read some reports that he could even be out for the tournament, but those are unconfirmed, so we know he will miss the next 2 games. Brazil taking on Switzerland, and England also playing tomorrow night against Wales, as that gentleman just reminded us, as if we needed reminding that England are playing Wales tomorrow. And as you say, there'll be lots of pre-match build-up with lots of alcohol imported for that one. We do know that England trained earlier today. Ben White missed training because he is ill. There is a press conference at 7 o'clock UK time where we're expecting Gareth Southgate and midfielder Jordan Henderson, who's also vice-captain, to take part in that press conference, and we'll see bring you any lines that come out of that one. Also, Wales have held a press conference earlier today and no lines in that one. Let's speak to some Swiss fans now, because I don't know what you call a herd of Swiss fans dressed as cows. Guys, you're live on GB News.
Oh, great. You want to hear a song?
Of course, we always want to hear a Swiss song. Give us a Swiss song. Okay. Wow, well, thank you. Just quickly, before you burst into song again, why are you dressed as cows?
Because they're the most beautiful thing in Switzerland.
Really?
Yes.
What about the people?
Unfortunately, they're even more
good-looking guys. Don't put yourself down.
And the girls in Switzerland.
I won't comment on that. How are you feeling about playing Brazil later?
Well, we are very comfortable. We are really comfortable.
Comfortable to lose. Very comfortable to lose.
We're winning.
You're going to win?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
You're not worried about Brazil, even without Neymar?
Neymar is not here, he's not win.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Right. And Switzerland, actually, got some. Who's your best player? You've got some very good players. Some people are saying Switzerland could go far.
The goalie, Jan Sommer, absolutely.
Yeah. Granit Xhaka?
Yeah.
So he's the best.
He's the best. Yeah.
He's a guarantee to win.
Yeah, guaranteed to win. Yeah, okay. Just give us another rendition of whatever song you're singing. What does it mean?
It's traditional Swiss song.
Farmer's boy.
All right, take it away, guys. I'll tell you what, Mark, those guys have been walking around the suit all day in those costumes in the heat. They've been absolutely milking it.
Oh, very good. Yeah, well, the cream of the crop, indeed. It wasn't quite a yodel, but it was getting there, wasn't it? Anyway, let's talk about something a bit more serious. We're being told that the Sports Minister, Stuart Andrew, attending the game tomorrow, England and Wales, will wear the armband, the rainbow-coloured One Love armband, prohibited by FIFA, of course. I mean, what's likely to happen to him if he does that?
Well, nothing, to be honest. He can still wear it. I mean, some TV presenters on other stations have been wearing the One Love armband. The Wales squad have been training in the One Love armband. Simply, the players cannot wear it when they are playing. But it does just keep fueling that conversation about, did FIFA handle the situation correctly when they said that they would sanction players with yellow cards? Should they have responded sooner to the fact that those European teams were always going to wear that One Love armband? They told FIFA a couple of months ago, we're going to do this, and FIFA were just silent. And then 2 days before the tournament, you're going to get a yellow card if you wear that armband. So all it will do is to continue that conversation in the press. But certainly, England, the FA, they won't be facing any sanctions because of that.
So you think even if he attends in an official capacity, they'll be lenient enough to let that take place in the stadium?
Yeah, they still can. Yeah, the German Interior Minister the other day was wearing the One Love armband when she was standing in the stands. Certain politicians have been speaking out about it, wearing One Love armbands as well in the stands. So as far as I understand it, they can't be sanctioned. It's purely if the players wear it.
I think we've got a reprise of the Swiss chorus there, which I thought you were going to actually join in for a moment. However, just looking ahead to England-Wales tomorrow, I mean, what's going to be happening in terms of the celebrations before the match and maybe the commiserations afterwards?
Well, we know in terms of the pre-match celebrations or build-up, as you will have it, a lot of the hotels, we know the Intercontinental, that's been a real hub, that hotel for Welsh fans here in Doha. Hotels like that will be offering those packages that we've heard so much about. So plenty of alcohol supplied, you kind of get 5 pints and a curry or some sort of meal included in your ticket, and then you basically go and you drink as much as you can, frankly, for that price. I did speak to one fan earlier on in the tournament who said it was a bit annoying because he actually wanted 6 pints and he wasn't allowed to buy 1 pint, he'd have to buy 5. So he had to drink in denominations of 5, which is a bit tricky if you're not a big drinker and you can't drink fast. But that's the way it will work in terms of an alcoholic build-up. The way a lot of fans have been doing it is coming into the souk, soaking up the atmosphere, getting soft drinks in and then making their way to the match, which kicks off at 10 o'clock local time tomorrow. And then after that, the souk is still lively here at 2 a.m, 3 a.m. They can then come back into the souk. But if they want to have a drink, they've got to go back to the hotel bars. Or we know one of the huge cruise ships that's anchored in the harbour in Doha, they also serve alcohol as well.
Perhaps no cows allowed. We'll see anyway. Thank you very much indeed for the musical interlude. Back to you a little later. Just to update you, Ghana 2, South Korea 0 at half-time. Plenty of your views been coming in today. Firstly, on the likelihood of those NHS strikes. Robbie says, if the NHS get their 17% pay rise, will we be getting a better service or even a reasonable service? Historically, 12% rise in investment resulted in a 3% reduction in service, he says. Even back in Blair's day, a large injection of cash produced no improvement for patients. On Labour and the Tories, Lee says, good afternoon, I now have absolutely no confidence in either our Conservative government and I also have absolutely no confidence in a Labour government. I trust not a single person in either to be honest nor truthful. Don't know where that leaves you, but there we are. Finally, on the Channel crossings, David says, we have an army and navy who should be defending against this invasion. The government is doing nothing to stop these crossings. You do not need a decade of court cases to stop an invasion. I think the RN, Royal Navy, tried it, but they've declared that they're no longer able to police the Channel. Keep the views coming as ever, and we'll be back at the top of the hour with lots more to come. Before that, an update on the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGiven from the Met Office. We've seen some fog to start the day in places. That will slowly lift. Some showers as well will ease later. Otherwise, for many, sunny spells, particularly for northern Scotland into parts of northwest England. The south as well seeing some sunshine, but West Wales into the southwest of England, especially Cornwall, will continue to see showers during the afternoon. 1 or 2 showers across central areas, but otherwise a good deal of dry weather, but not sunny for everyone. There will be some low cloud and mist persisting across east and northeast England. Where the low cloud in northeast England lifts and breaks, we're going to see that drifting south during the evening, and during the early hours that will tend to sit across the Midlands and East Anglia. Showers along the south coast will continue to affect the far southeast. Otherwise, it's a dry night for most, with clear spells towards Scotland, Northern Ireland, Western England and Wales. And here, A chilly start, -3 or 4 Celsius, but there will be some dense fog around because we've got light winds as well, and this ridge of high pressures to start things on Tuesday. That, for most, will bring a fine start to the day, a break in all the wet and windy weather that we've seen during the last few weeks and months. But there will be some of that dense fog around. Some low cloud, predominantly across central and eastern England, but elsewhere, fog patches tending to lift, and skies will brighten. Scotland, northern and western England, Wales and Northern Ireland seeing sunny spells and highs of 10 or 11 Celsius. But where we do see some fog and low cloud persisting, 3 to 6 Celsius is more likely. So a chilly day to come in places, 1 or 2 showers, never too far away from the far southeast. Otherwise, for the vast majority, it is looking dry. That is until this area of rain moves in, and that will affect parts of Northern Ireland during Wednesday. It never makes much further progress east because high pressure builds and turns drier everywhere.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello, it's 2 o'clock. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and here's what's coming up for you this hour. Hundreds more illegal migrants arrive in Britain from across the Channel. GB News understands at least 7 boats have been intercepted after weather conditions improved overnight. More than 50 MPs have been urging Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to change modern slavery laws to help tackle the problem, led by veteran MP David Davis, who will be speaking to him shortly. The NHS set to be hit by winter strikes. The Army's on standby to help out, as Rishi Sunak says he wants vaccine-style task forces to tackle cancer and obesity. We'll be speaking with the Liberal Democrat health spokesperson Daisy Cooper. And we're heading back to Doha for the latest in the World Cup. Brazil, Portugal, Uruguay in action. And of course, Wales, England tomorrow. Currently South Korea and Ghana. Ghana 2-0 up. And Britain's sports minister, who's gay, says he'll wear the rainbow One Love armband at tomorrow's game. And as ever, we want to hear from you. Tell us what you think of all the stories of the day at gbviews at gbnews.uk. All that to come. First, the news with Rosie.
afternoon. It is 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. More than 50 Conservative MPs have signed a letter urging the Prime Minister to introduce emergency legislation to help ease the migrant crisis. The group says, firstly, people should be more rapidly returned to the safe countries that they've come from. And secondly, when claims are made that people have unwillingly been trafficked to the UK, they should be sent back without objection. MPs, including Sir Graham Brady and Esther McVeigh, say the amendments would be a strong deterrent for those thinking of crossing the Channel. GB News sources say more than 350 people were intercepted on 7 small boats this morning. National Grid could pay households to cut their power usage for the first time tomorrow in a bid to avoid blackouts. The operator's warning outages at a nuclear power plant in France has put pressure on supply. It might need now to use its new demand flexibility service. Households may be asked to reduce their usage at certain times in the day. They'll then be paid for any reductions they make. The government's launching a £1 billion scheme to make middle-income homes more energy efficient. The 3-year scheme will see hundreds of thousands of homes receive loft and cavity wall insulation from the spring. Households that don't currently get support to upgrade their homes will be prioritised, whilst a fifth of the funding will be set aside for the most vulnerable. The Business Secretary, Grant Shapps, told us the measures will help households reduce their energy consumption.
£1 billion, which is in addition to a lot more money that's been provided previously, is to allow anyone in any kind of housing, could be private rent, it could be their own home, could be social housing, to improve the property in order to make sure that it meets those higher standards. And that will save people, quite a lot of money.
The Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, told GB News Labour wants to insulate 19 million homes as soon as possible.
It's about 10 years too late. I mean, this should have been a quick early win for the government, reducing people's fuel bills and doing the right thing by the environment. I mean, it's a win-win. Why has it taken so long? This government have neither the ambition or the direction. Of course, I welcome when they come a little bit onto our territory, whether it's a windfall tax or greater energy efficiency ambition, but they've got nowhere near the comprehensive programme they need to get this country onto the right path.
The government's considering asking the armed forces to stand in for hospital staff during possible strikes this winter. Health officials are drawing up contingencies to cover frontline workers as ambulance drivers and paramedics consider joining nurses in their upcoming walkouts. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says they're concerned about the impact the action could have on patients.
Well, no formal request has been made by the Department of Health to the military, but of course we will look as part of our normal contingency plans at a range of options. The priority for me is to continue the dialogue with the trade unions, with the RCN. I've been extremely clear that my door is open. They have raised a range of issues, not just pay, but also about working conditions, patient safety, and so I'm very happy to continue that dialogue.
In China, authorities have put up barriers around parts of Shanghai following a weekend of protest against strict COVID restrictions. 10 people were killed in a tower block fire, sparking civil unrest across the country. Demonstrators claim coronavirus measures may have hindered their escape. They're now calling for President Xi Jinping's resignation. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is urging the Chinese government to listen to the people's demands.
It is rare that the Chinese people protest publicly like this. They know the risks. In fact, some of the protesters are saying they know the risks, but it's something they feel incredibly strongly about. And as I say, because they are a rarity, I think that both the international community should take notice, but more importantly, the Chinese government itself should listen to what the Chinese people are saying to them.
You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Mark.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed. So, more than 50 Conservative MPs signing a letter to demand change in the modern slavery laws. Well, those amended laws would then help to return asylum seekers home, according to the signatories, by automatically rejecting applicants from so-called safe countries. Senior Tory MP David Davis leading on the matter, speaking to him in just a moment. But not the only problem that Rishi Sunak facing, also increasing pressure on him to lift the ban on onshore wind farms, with a growing number of MPs, including former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, calling for that particular action. Let's speak now to our political reporter, Olivia Utley, who joins us from Westminster. Olivia, Grant Shapps this morning on the round saying it's not really a rebellion, but if it's not that, it's certainly restlessness on the backbenches.
It certainly is restlessness, and perhaps not just on the backbenches. It's being reported in the Telegraph that Michael Gove, who's obviously the Levelling Up Minister, wants to lift the ban on building new wind farms as well. Jake Berry is saying that he's the former party chairman who already spoke up against Rishi Sunak in relation to Suella Braverman just after he became appointed. So you've got a number of very senior MPs, possibly even cabinet secretaries, very worried about Rishi Sunak's ban on wind farms, and they are prepared to speak out. That huge popularity for Rishi Sunak that we saw just 6 or 7 weeks ago seems to be beginning to be chiselled away at rather quickly. Then at the same time, of course, we've got these 50 MPs who've written to the Prime Minister about Albanian migrants, and David Davis is making the case that the modern slavery legislation, which has essentially become a loophole in the immigration system, needs to be rewritten. He's making quite a strong case. The way that the modern slavery legislation works is that anyone who claims to be a victim of modern slavery has to have their claim investigated. Those investigations on average take 420 days, so over a year, while migrants are staying in this country waiting for those claims to be processed. And he argues that if someone is claiming that they've been trafficked over here against their will, then the kindest and most humane thing to do is to send them back. On the Tory front benches, there is definitely sympathy for that way of looking at things, and Rishi Sunak and definitely his Home Secretary Suella Braverman is very keen to get to the bottom of the small boats crisis. But it's pretty difficult for Rishi Sunak to get that sort of amendment through. The legislation was written very tightly by Theresa May, and it's particularly difficult for him while he's facing all sorts of other rebellions at the same time.
How do we think he's going to deal with this? Clearly, he had, as you say, a sort of bit of a honeymoon period. That seems to have gone now. Will he perhaps be more open to suggestions that, for instance, the onshore wind ban may have to be changed just to keep everyone on side? Or is he going to try and stamp his authority on the party?
Well, it doesn't look particularly as though he's about to stamp his authority on the party, so to speak. I think that there is room for a potential shift on the onshore wind ban because you've got such prominent MPs, Michael Gove in particular, who holds a lot of sway in the rest of the Conservative Party, pushing back against it. But that wouldn't keep everyone happy by any means. There are plenty of Conservative MPs who represent constituencies where wind farms would be built and where they would be very unpopular. So Rishi Sunak's going to be having to walk a very thin tightrope here, and just being the sort of manager that he's been so far. So far he's sold himself as a sort of competent manager-style Prime Minister who can be in charge. May not be enough when the political ship begins to get a bit rocky.
Yeah, and talking of the boat being rocked, of course, we've got all the industrial strife as well, the NHS issues of the nurses, perhaps even ambulance drivers, the train strikes. With a winter of discontent, you know, the problems are piling up for him.
The problems certainly are. The best thing that Rishi Sunak can hope for at the moment is that we have a mild winter, which would help solve some of those problems, really. But if we get a really cold snap, then these nurses' strikes could begin to look very dangerous indeed. The first one that's planned is planned for exactly the run-up to Christmas, and is actually sandwiched between 2 train strikes. So you can imagine a situation where you've got elderly people stuck at home at that very cold, difficult time of year for them, unable to get into hospital, and you've got NHS staff unable to get in as well because of the train strikes. And you could see a situation where people are getting quite seriously ill and being stuck at home. Not to mention, of course, this is all coming against the backdrop of a 7.1 million long NHS waiting list, with people unable to get those routine appointments and the sort of treatments that they need to be able to go to work. One problem is that we've got a big productivity crisis in this country, and one reason for that is that there are people who need to have certain operations, for example, to be able to do their jobs. So yes, you've got all these difficult crises piling up for the Prime Minister at the same time, and you've got his own backbenches beginning to show some chinks in the armour as far as his popularity is concerned.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed. As you say, the boat being rocked from all sides at the moment. And talking of boats being rocked, of course, the latest we've got from our own correspondent Mark White is that 7 boats. Thank you very much, Olivia. I'll let you go because we've got David Davis coming up. But in terms of the boats, we've got 7 boats, we're being told, coming across the channel today, with the weather conditions having improved. And as we heard, that letter going in from 50 MPs, including David Davis, asking for the laws to be changed, the slavery laws, to actually give some more weaponry to the government. Well, earlier we spoke to Conservative MP for Ashfield, Lee Anderson, about that letter. Here's what he had to say.
I agree with everything that's in the letter. My problem is we're sending too many letters. This is obvious stuff, this is. And we should have sorted this out when we brought in the Nationality and Borders Bill. We've not. And now we're scratching our heads, wondering why tens of thousands of people are still coming in. 12,000 Albanians are coming in. 50% of those are being granted asylum. They're not coming here to contribute towards our economy. Well, they are, but we know what sort of economy they're going to be contributing to. Look, I'm just angry. I'm fed up. I'm sick to the back teeth of sending letters to number 10 and nothing gets done, so I don't see the point. I'll keep rattling on, my friend, in the chamber and doing that and putting awkward questions to the Prime Minister and the Home Office. That's what I'll be doing to sort this mess out.
Well, let's speak now to David Davis, leading that group of MPs, joins us now on GB News Live. Thank you very much, Mr Davis, for joining us. Lee Anderson saying, the letters to number 10 don't seem to be doing anything. Why do you think this one might be different?
Well, because it's fairly clear. This is a new problem. I mean, the Albanian problem, we're focusing on primarily for this, is a new problem. It's grown up in the last year. 12,000, really, from next to nothing a year earlier, is a huge increase. It's overwhelming the system. And the Albanians are coming from a safe country. I mean, we're all members of the European Convention on Human Rights. They have got less complaints against them than we have in the court. So they're a safe country, first off. And we aren't the only person to think that. The Swedes, with a fantastic human rights record and so on, have, from the beginning of 2021, over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, have said, if you come from Albania, you can't claim asylum, you're sent straight back. No ifs or buts, you go straight back. The only qualification of that is if there's some other consideration, humanitarian consideration. So that's half the problem. The other half of the problem is if that doesn't work, they're told by the people who bring them, and bear in mind, the Albanians themselves may be perfectly decent people, but the people who bring them are criminals. Understand that. So the people who bring them tell them, claim this, claim you've been trafficked and you can't come back. Well, it seems to me a fairly straightforward, common sense change to that. If we change the law on trafficking to say, if you come from a safe country, we can send you back to your own home. And if you want to pursue a legal case, then you can do so from there, not from here. Those two things together would allow us to, for all new migrants arriving across the channel, pretty much to send them back within days. Certainly not weeks, months or years as it is now. And that would stop the system being overwhelmed.
So this was specifically target, as you say, that the schooling or the coaching, as Mark White, indeed, our Home Affairs editor, has identified, where the gangs tell people what to say when they arrive. However, I just wonder how many legal appeals and other processes would go on, even if you managed to change and update the law.
Well, one of the problems is the longer you take, the more appeals you get. There's a harsh truth that if they're here for a couple of weeks, they'll find a British lawyer and away they go. If they're here for a couple of years, they'll meet somebody, get married, have children, and then the story's over. They can stay because they have family rights. So the quicker you do it, the better. But the best thing I can do is point you to the Swedish example. The Swedes introduced this in April, I think, of last year, 2021, and they've got 0 asylum approval since then, 0, and they did it off the back of an international court, a European court judgment. So it's based on international law. And lots of people say, "Oh, well, we will be able to." No, we won't. So if we got the gumption to do it with all new arrivals from a safe country, I don't mean from Syria or Afghanistan where they may have a claim, but from a safe country, then frankly, it should knock out almost all of the 12,000 a year that we're looking at the moment.
Right. Mark White has updated us that at least 7 boats were intercepted today, the weather conditions having improved overnight. Now, this comes after we gave the French government yet more money to actually patrol and police their beaches. Is this another failure of that particular policy?
Well, obviously it is at one level. I mean, I think that the Home Office is starting to tighten up. In fact, I went to see them a couple of weeks ago. Let me be straightforward about it. I went to them to talk to them about tightening up their own surveillance, because in my view, we should be able to detect these people on the beach in France and immediately notify the French, so that actually help the French do the job. We haven't, I don't think, done that yet. I think our own surveillance is a bit patchy. So it is a failure, but I give it a couple of weeks to bed down. But frankly, that by itself won't solve it, because what happens? The French police find them, they destroy the boat, and they release them. And they don't come and have another go. They don't arrest them. And I think people shouldn't be under any misapprehension about this. This is not an agreement for the French police to take them into custody. It's just for them to make it difficult. And of course, if you try 2, 3, 4 times, eventually you get across. So I think we've got to take away the legal basis, the loopholes that are acting as a pull factor for these people. And that allows us then to do it properly with the other ones.
Yeah, and given that this letter is signed by you, 50 MPs, including Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 committee, what does that indicate to perhaps Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman about the depth of feeling on the backbenches that this is a government failing in this particular policy?
Well, what it tells them is that pretty much every wing of the party is in agreement about how to address this. You had Lee Anderson on before, but Peter Bottomley, the far of the House, who's normally seen as from the left of the party as the signatory, it's from everywhere. And it didn't really take as much effort to get 50. And we've got another 10 who are signed but are not public, 10 Privy Councillors. It's really, really right across the party. So what it's telling you is that we all want to do something about it. And this sort of thing that we're talking about in this letter is both practical and popular with the party. And bear in mind, by the way, I am probably the MP that stood up most for asylum seekers, for protecting people's rights, for the rule of law. You would normally expect me to be very careful about this, and I have been. But this is about the abuse of asylum law, not the use of asylum law.
Yeah, and of course the involvement, as you said, of criminal gangs. Mr Davis, stay with us if you will. I'm just going to bring in the issue of China, because Sir James Cleverly's been speaking on that. So we'll just update people on that, and I'll be interested to get your view in reaction, because authorities in China cracking down on those protests over the COVID restrictions, one of the most serious challenges facing the Communist Party. This is what James Cleverly said a little earlier.
Protests against the Chinese government are rare. And when they do happen, I think the world should take notice, but I think the Chinese government should take notice. It's clear that the Chinese people themselves are deeply unhappy with what is going on, about the restrictions imposed upon them by the Chinese government. These are the voices of Chinese people talking to their government, and I think it's right that the Chinese government listens to what those people are saying.
Foreign Secretary earlier, David Davis, still with us. And of course, Mr Davis, Rishi Sunak's giving this speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet tonight on foreign policy. The phrase being used, I gather, is robust pragmatism. People just wondering what that means. Is it actually a return to George Osborne's still trying to engage on a commercial level, perhaps, with the Chinese?
I think it's very hard to avoid engaging at a commercial level with China if you buy a telephone or a camera or a television or even the computer I'm talking to you on now. A large part of it is always made in China. So there is a bit of a practical limit on what you can do in terms of trade actions. But what we shouldn't do is, I guess the phrase is kowtow to China. And after the early Cameron Osborne government had difficulties with China, they did basically become really too soft with them. As we did with Putin after Litvinenko.
Yes, indeed.
Guess what happened? They killed Skripal. This is a story across the board that when you're dealing with these totalitarian states, you're pretty much dealing with the guy at the top. You're dealing with an individual. So the psychology is straightforward. You have to be firm with them. You have to be tough with them, and you have to do things, if need be, that's painful for them. We're not going to shut off all trade, but I think there's quite a lot we can do short of that. Now, James is the Foreign Secretary, and so he's always diplomatic. He says, well, it's not often you get demonstrations in China calling for the leader to go. Yeah, and there's a reason for that. You end up dead if you do that in most totalitarian states, and I suspect the same is true in China, or imprisoned, or your life ruined in some way. So it is a spectacular event that's going on. I think, really, it can't be overstated. Not since Tiananmen Square we've seen anything quite like this. And one of the first things we should do is say to the Chinese government, you treat these demonstrators properly. If we see you locking them up and punishing them, then there'll be a consequence for that. That's the first thing to do. China is on a very, very slow march to being a modern state. It's sort of a pseudo-capitalist state at the moment, and it's a semi-democracy, and we need to get it on the move towards being a proper democracy, which means rights for demonstrators.
Although, of course, many would say that our voice was... that our voice was ignored over Hong Kong, but of course that's another issue. But David Davis, thank you very much indeed for your time and joining us here on GB News as ever. Thanks for your views.
My pleasure.
Let's just reflect that it is now 2-2 between Ghana and South Korea. It's all happening in Qatar, and this is the reaction. I think these are the Brazil fans getting ready for their game. And that is a replica, I think, of the Jules Rimet trophy there in the background, a little bigger than the real thing. But darkness has fallen, temperature dropping a little bit because Paul was indicating to us it's been in the high 20s. But the good news, we're expecting the temperature to drop in the days ahead, which is good news, of course, for England and Wales tomorrow. But we'll be back to Qatar to get the latest from Paul as the fans start dancing, even before the match has begun. Brazil, of course, the favourites in the tournament. Also coming up, we'll be speaking to our North West of England reporter with a Burnley-based charity that's helping those struggling in the cold months ahead. And, of course, the latest from a rather warmer Qatar. Before that, let's take a break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Now, the government's considering asking the Army to step in to help under contingency plans to cover gaps in any frontline services during the threatened NHS strikes. Well, it also comes as ambulance drivers and paramedics consider joining nurses in the upcoming walkouts. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister announcing more than £113 million to address the 4 challenges facing the NHS, he says: cancer, obesity, mental health and addiction. Each of those missions being led by an independent expert, we're told. Well, the Prime Minister hopes that blueprint inspired by the COVID vaccine rollout and investment in new technologies could help combat the various issues. Let's speak now to the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper, who's also the party's health and social care spokesperson. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. First, the announcement that these various contingency plans are already underway. I mean, is that just sensible planning or an indication that things may actually turn rather nasty?
Well, I think things have already turned rather nasty. We've already heard health bosses in the last few days saying that patients are already starting to die in the back of ambulances because ambulances can't actually get their patients into hospitals because hospitals can't discharge medically well patients back home because there isn't enough social care provision. So we're already in a crisis right now. And as you mentioned, the government is announcing big plans for research on big, long-standing issues. And that's very welcome. But we need the same level of ambition from this government to tackle the crisis that we're facing right now, right here this winter.
OK, but given what's happened with the public finances, would the Liberal Democrats consider a 17% pay award for the nurses?
Well, it's for the government to negotiate what that final figure is. But I certainly think that people need to realise what an incredibly tough position nurses are in. You know, 1 in 4 hospitals now have food banks for their nurses and other hospital staff. We know that 2/3 of nurses earn less than the national average salary. And of course, they've been through an incredibly difficult time over the last couple of years when all of us stood on our doorsteps at 8 p.m. on a Thursday, clapping our hands for thanking them for keeping people alive during the pandemic. So I do think that nurses do deserve a pay rise, but it's for the government to decide and negotiate what that final figure is.
But would you accept 17% as being manageable given the current circumstances?
I think we all know that there are difficult decisions to be made, but I think those people who are on the lowest paid in our public sector do need to be able to have enough salary coming in so they can afford to put food on their tables for them and their families, so they can afford to put petrol in their cars. I mean, it's just unacceptable that we have nurses and hospital staff having to eat from food banks. It's simply not OK.
Now, what do you make of this idea of the virus vaccine blueprint, as it was called, to help with these various issues, cancer, obesity, mental health and so forth? Clearly, the vaccine rollout worked eventually, but could it work across all these other areas as well by bringing in outside independent experts?
Well, I certainly do think it's worth testing. I think one of the things that the task force did incredibly well was they managed to speed up many of the processes that were often very slow. So, for example, when various researchers are applying for funding, they have to wait several months, if not years, to get a response as to whether their funding application has been successful. So if you can actually reduce the wait in between some of these things and you can accelerate the overall research process, I think it could work very well. But as I say, we have a crisis right now, right here in our NHS. We know that patients are dying in the back of ambulances. We know that our NHS staff are... We need that same level of ambition for our NHS right now.
Right, we are getting some interruption on the signal, but I'll just try one more question. And that is Steve Bryan, who's the Tory chair of the Health and Social Care Committee, on the issue of cancer, saying that there's already a cancer treatment plan, and he's expressed doubt that the government can deliver on that. I mean, is this one particular area where we seem to be failing, given, as you've indicated, the waiting list that we've got?
I think there will be some concern that the government seems to keep announcing new things all the time rather than seeing them through. So we've heard this on cancer. We've heard it on dementia as well. The government has promised various sort of, 10-year programmes and then haven't delivered. But there is concern. I do welcome the fact there is a renewed focus on cancer, on obesity and mental health in particular. But we do need the government to have a single strategy for tackling these rather than constantly reinventing the wheel.
Daisy Cooper, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats and, of course, Health Spokesman as well. Thanks for your time here in GB News. Thanks for joining us. Well, coming up, more on the civil disobedience that's been breaking out in China. How will the Chinese authorities react to that? First, though, let's get a news update with Rosie.
A very good afternoon. 2:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. More than 50 Conservative MPs have signed a letter that urging the Prime Minister to introduce emergency legislation to ease the migrant crisis. The group says, firstly, people should be more rapidly returned to safe countries that they've come from. And secondly, when claims are made that people have unwillingly been trafficked to the UK, they should be sent back without objection. GB News sources say that more than 350 people were intercepted on 7 small boats this morning. National Grid is very shortly due to decide whether to pay households to cut their power usage for the first time tomorrow in a bid to avoid blackouts. The operator's warning outages at a nuclear power plant in France has put pressure on supplies. It might need now to use its new demand flexibility service. Households may be asked to reduce their usage at certain times in the day and will be paid for any reductions that they made. A decision's expected imminently, and we'll bring it to you here as soon as we get it. The government's launching a £1 billion scheme to make middle-income homes more energy efficient. The 3-year scheme will see hundreds of thousands of homes receive loft and cavity wall insulation from the spring. Households that don't currently get support to upgrade their homes are going to be prioritised, and a fifth of the funding will be set aside for the most vulnerable. The government's considering asking the armed forces to stand in for hospital staff during possible strikes this winter. Health officials are drawing up contingencies to cover frontline workers as ambulance drivers and paramedics consider joining nurses in their upcoming walkouts. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says they're concerned about the impact the action could have on patients. The Foreign Secretary is urging the Chinese government to listen to its people after a weekend of protests against strict COVID restrictions. 10 people were killed in a tower block fire. That sparked civil unrest across the country. Demonstrators claim that coronavirus measures may have hindered people trying to escape. They're now calling for President Xi Jinping's resignation. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's just update you on what's happening at the World Cup out in Qatar. These are the pictures of all the fans getting ready for the big game of today. I'm sure that the other teams won't mind us saying that. Brazil, the favourites for the championship, the gold and green shirts gathering there. But on the pitch, it's all happening with Ghana now 3-2 up against South Korea. So plenty of goals today at 73 minutes. And just to remind you, we've got Brazil taking on Switzerland at 4 o'clock, and then Portugal and Uruguay at 7 o'clock with a certain Cristiano Ronaldo. Let's see what he can do on the pitch. And a small matter of England and Wales tomorrow, where we're being told 6 tonnes of alcohol worth £1 million have been imported and are now currently being secreted around hotel bars and restaurants in Doha. More on that, of course, with Paul Hawkins, but let's head to China now, which is seeing growing anti-government protests across all of its major cities. Unusual scenes, indeed, of civil disobedience. People holding up sheets of A4 white paper, a symbol of their movement, a silent protest. And since the initial demonstrations against the strict zero COVID policies, they've grown now directly calling for the removal of President Xi Jinping. And the protesters believe that the extreme COVID measures blocked 10 people from escaping from a tower block fire, and it resulted in them being killed by the blaze. A number of people being detained in the capital, Beijing, and in Shanghai too, we're being told. Well, let's get now the views here in the studio. Charles Parton, who spent 20 years of his diplomatic career working in China, Hong Kong and Taiwan. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Clearly, it was an initial reaction to these deaths and the frustration at the COVID lockdown, but it seems to be growing now, and an unusually public call for Xi Jinping to stand down, just, 1 month into his third term?
Very unusual indeed. I mean, the personality cult of Xi Jinping has been pushed very heavily, and you don't say nasty things about the leader.
Yeah.
And here are a lot of people on the streets doing precisely that. Very worrying for the authorities.
How do you interpret that? I mean, is it the frustration at being locked up with these various COVID restrictions, or is it that we've got a growing cohort of younger people in the cities, the urban areas, prepared now to speak out?
I think that what the COVID has done has eroded the trust of the people, or many of the people anyway, in the party. And they're really getting very fed up with the restrictions and the way the party has acted in a very high-handed and repressive and high surveillance manner. That's really eroded things. But a lot of people are, young in particular, very worried about employment and the fact that the economy really isn't going as well. So you've got this coming together of two impulses.
Yeah.
And I think this economic problem is a very serious one.
And that's being affected by the COVID lockdowns. That's really stalled the economy.
Well, of course, it's been exacerbated by that. And so, in a sense, it looks as though we'll have to choose at some stage between continuing lockdown or opening up the economy. And both paths will not be easy for the party.
Now, we've seen in many of these demonstrations the mobile phones. I mean, they still have access, in the urban centres at least, to the outside world and the internet and so on. So they're quite clear about the world view of their leader and what is happening in China as well.
Yes, they are. And I think what's, in a sense, surprising, given all the controls on China, that nevertheless the sheer volume and the speed of the internet and their mobile phones has allowed this to sort of spread and for pictures to get out and around about both in China and the world.
And you think that's given them some encouragement or some sort of support, really, that they think they can actually get their voices heard?
I don't know whether they are optimistic for the long term. I mean, this is a highly repressive regime, and they know that. But either it's a measure of their desperation or courage, or both. Frustration. They're prepared to do this, and perhaps they think there's safety in numbers. But it always takes a brave person to be the first on the street.
Therefore, the next question, given what we saw in Tiananmen Square when the tanks rolled, what do you think the reaction is likely to be? And indeed, can the authorities clamp down on all these major city areas?
Well, Tiananmen is worth recalling because that's the last time that these riots and protests, which happen all the time in China, but have actually had a sort of nationalistic theme and have spread throughout the country. So that must be deeply worrying to them. There's a very much more advanced and developed system of surveillance and repression than there was in those days, but on the other hand, as we've just said, the ability to communicate is a lot more difficult. So it's going to be a tough problem. One always says one expects the dice are heavily loaded in the favour of the authorities, but until things go drastically wrong, that's what you always think.
But the flip side of that is what happens within the dynamics of the Communist Party. If those around Xi Jinping think this is not going well, perhaps it is time to move him aside or get someone else in. I mean, has he got that stamp of authority within the Communist Party itself?
Yes, I think he has. And beyond that, I think things have got to get very, very bad economically before the leadership, because they stand and fall together. And they saw what happened in '89 when they were disunited. It came very close. So, were the Chinese communists, were the Chinese economy to implode and there were really, really mass unemployment and misery at that time, then there may well be spits in the leadership. But I wouldn't expect, this is very, very early days, and it may all fizzle out or be controlled.
Or be stamped out.
Or it may not. I mean, that's the thing about revolution, is it's very hard to predict.
The dynamics take on a sort of life of their own, don't they?
Yes, but what policy they do from now, because they've got this contradiction between, do we continue with the zero COVID policy? Because if they don't, as one academic in Shanghai calculated, a minimum of, say, 1.6 million deaths and overwhelming of the health services, all of which will be blamed on the party, because all good things come from the party, but then
and all bad things too.
All bad things too. And that would be a major blow. And that's why Xi Jinping has been so strong in the zero COVID policy. But on the other hand, keep it going, and the riots may keep going, but also the economy continues to go down faster. So not
damned
easy.
If he does, damned if he doesn't.
Well, particularly without decent vaccines, without them sufficient in enough arms, and without a decent health service to cope if it all goes badly wrong.
Charles Parton, thank you very much for joining us here on GB News. Thank you very much indeed. Charles, who spent 22 years in China, Hong Kong and Taiwan. Now, here, the National Grid issuing warnings that power supplies across Britain could be limited tonight and tomorrow before actually retracting that warning. But despite the U-turn, it's adding to concerns about our power supply as the evenings become ever darker and colder. It's expected that a scheme to pay homes to cut their power usage could be rolled out as soon as tomorrow. But joining us now is Catherine Porter, energy consultant at What Logic. Catherine, thanks very much for joining us. I think this warning sort of went out about 1:30 lunchtime, and then at 2 o'clock they suddenly withdrew it again, an indication of perhaps how, well, rocky the situation is.
Yes, that's right. And it's actually the second time we've had one of these notices. We had one last week as well under similar circumstances. And this is reflecting the reality that when it's not very windy, we can struggle to meet demand. And that's exactly what's happening. It's not windy today. And so we're struggling to have enough generation.
Right. I gather the other problem is, though, that it's also problems with the French nuclear provision, which comes across one of these interconnectors across the channel. And there we are thinking that, nuclear power is the answer. It's always there, always switched on. Not necessarily the case, it seems.
Well, the problem in France is that they haven't properly maintained their fleet. This is actually the second time in 5 years that large amounts of their fleet have had to go offline for investigation work. I think nuclear power is reliable, and I would support having more of it available in Britain, but you do need to maintain it properly, and unfortunately the French haven't been doing that.
And this is EDF, which is a state-run company.
It is, that's right. EDF spent 10 years when it didn't build any new nuclear power stations. And so they saw quite a large skills exodus from the industry as a result of that. And it's difficult to make that back. And we're seeing the results of that now.
So tell us a little bit more about what we were expecting with this new scheme where people were effectively being paid to switch off their devices. How does that work, given that we've got so many separate electricity companies?
Yes, so what happens is that you need to have a smart meter, and the smart meter needs to be working in smart mode. So there's about 1 million households that have smart meters that the meters don't work correctly, so they wouldn't be able to participate. And then your supplier also needs to be part of the scheme. So if you have all those things in place, then when National Grid decides that it needs people to contribute by reducing their demand, it informs them a day in advance and tells them, right, at this time tomorrow, we need you to reduce your consumption, and then they'll get paid if they do that.
OK, but not at the moment, it seems. Anyway, we shall see what happens in the next 12 hours. Catherine Porter from What Logic, thank you very much indeed. So just to update you, the capacity market notice, as it's called, was issued at 1:33 and then withdrawn at 2:04 p.m. So we'll see what emerges in the coming hours and keep you updated here on GB News. Now, in other news, a teenager was arrested over the fatal stabbings of two 16-year-old boys in south-east London, not been charged as yet. Kean Solanke was found with stab wounds at Thamesmead, and then Charlie Bertolo discovered at Abbey Wood on Saturday night. Police say they are treating the two incidents as being linked. Well, both of the boys pronounced dead and murder investigations launched, but the police rather appealing to the public for any help to actually build a picture of what might have happened. Let's speak now to Graham Wetone, who is a police commentator and author of the book How to Be a Police Officer. Graham, yet more knife crime, yet another fatal stabbing. Despite all the initiatives on knife amnesties and stop and search, it just seems a problem that won't go away.
Yeah, society problem. The police are at the forefront of trying to deal with this. Families become the victims of this because, they suffer the tragedy of these sorts of incidents we've seen over the weekend. So much more needs to be done. It does come down to, in a government like this, comes down to funding. It comes down to funding for the youth initiatives, comes down to funding for youth workers, comes down to funding for just people to get involved in diverting young people away from life of crime and carrying weapons on the streets.
Yeah, we don't know exactly yet what the background may be, though detectives say that they believe these deaths to be linked. I mean, the awful fact is you look at the age of not just those two that have died, but the person being arrested as well, all 16 years old. And one wonders what sort of life they've been living.
Yeah, it does. And again, it comes back down to family backgrounds, etc., what sort of upbringing they've had, what sort of outlook they've got in their lives. Again, comes down to what involvement there's been in those young people's lives that's led to this tragedy. But it comes down to, again, funding, more of a deterrent on the streets, more police officers, more visible patrols, more uniform patrols. It comes down to resources and funding.
Yeah, you said deterrent, but I mean, they have tried these things, as I was saying, knife amnesties, the stop and search initiatives, which are controversial in themselves. I mean, what more could actually be done physically?
More of that, more of the same. Right. But again, it comes down to supporting the police and supporting courts and deterrent factors that stops people from actually taking this course of action, carrying weapons with them and then using them. It just seems it's so, it's almost like every week we're getting this now. So
yeah, indeed.
If not London and across the country.
Yeah, not just a problem for the capital, as you were saying. Well, Graham, thank you very much for that. And, of course, we'll see what emerges as the investigation continues, the police asking for public help with that particular incident. Thank you very much. Depressing facts, of course, of another two deaths on the streets. Now, we found out the winners and runners-up of I'm a Celebrity, Get Out of Here. Lot would be voting for Matt Hancock, it thought, but he avoided elimination after elimination, doing something right, it seems, managing to end in third place. Runner-up, Hollyoaks star Owen Warner, but the Queen of the Jungle, the public favourite Lioness Jill Scott. But was it that man, Mr Hancock, who stole the show? The MP defending his decision to take part and take time off work from Parliament to appear in the jungle, saying that politicians needed to be seen as human beings. But what next for him? Well, he had the Tory whip removed, no longer technically a part of the government, and said that he would donate part of his fee, said to be £400,000, to charities in his constituency. Well, joining us now is entertainment correspondent Rebecca Toomey joining us. Was it entertaining, Rebecca?
Normally entertaining. What was most entertaining is that we really didn't get to see any humility from Matt Hancock. In his exit interview yesterday, it's almost as if he became the politician again that he really is. He claims he wanted to show people the real him and that politicians are people too. But what we really saw is just, it looked like a performance again. I think the whole exercise for him was really more about his ego than really connecting with younger constituents and younger voters, which is what he claimed he wanted to do, and he wanted to raise awareness of dyslexia. I'm not really sure that he did that. He did very well in the trials. He did persevere, but I don't think he really came across as very endearing, and I'm not really sure what he really did for the general public in this.
Well, do you believe then he was trying to get some sort of public rehabilitation by appearing and showing I am a good guy, really?
I think that's what he says he wanted to do, but I'm not really sure how he did that. He still hasn't really apologised to people. He said he was on there when he was in the jungle. He said he wanted some form of forgiveness from people, but I'm not really sure what he actually did and what doing some trials in the jungle and getting votes and being paid a phenomenal fee actually did to help people and to apologise. So I think really this was a very good PR exercise in turning him more into a mainstream celebrity than really focusing on politics.
Was it also a PR exercise for ITV? They clearly got the viewers as a result of all this, and they played the game quite cleverly as well.
It was a very, very good booking for ITV because very early on in the show, they lost one of their kind of key stars. She was a former Love Islander, Olivia Attwood. So she was forced to leave. So I think it's very fortunate that they had someone of Matt Hancock's calibre, and also moved it away from, we've got so many reality stars now, so it moved it away from that and into sort of attracting a wider audience. I think a lot of people watched it to just see Matt Hancock suffer with all those trials, and suffer he did. He did actually endure some horrible trials in the jungle.
Yes, the snakes seemed to do their trick, didn't they? But do you feel a little sorry for Jill Scott, who actually won it? No one seems to be talking about her, and seemed to be the genuine article.
He was phenomenal in there, and I think, yes, you cannot have someone like Matt Hancock in there and it not overshadow everyone else and everything else. She was, you know, a brilliant contestant, and the focus was very much on Matt Hancock, but I think she is a bit of a national icon now. She was a lioness, now she's won I'm a Celebrity. I think she doesn't really seem to seek fame too much because she's a hugely talented sportswoman. So I don't think she'll mind. She's quite a modest character, but I think you cannot have Matt Hancock in that show and he not dominate, because we're all just, I think, still very angry with him.
Yeah, well, maybe she should be jetted off to Qatar now to start commentating or at least having some involvement with the World Cup. But thanks very much indeed for your view, Rebecca. And, of course, we'll salute the real queen of the jungle. Thank you very much indeed. Talking of Qatar, let's go live there now to Stadium, the snappily entitled Stadium 974. Made apparently from old shipping containers, but it will host Brazil versus Switzerland coming up shortly. And in the other game underway, South Korea-Ghana, the score currently 3-2 to Ghana. Lots of goals, but it's Brazil, of course, who are the favourites for the tournament, facing Switzerland at 4. Lots of gold and green shirts arriving there, and Brazilian flags. And then the man of the moment, some may say, Cristiano Ronaldo in action tonight at 7 with Portugal taking on Uruguay in what could be a feisty affair. Talking feisty affairs, let's head to the souk and join Paul Hawkins, our reporter there, following all the action. And even the sing-alongs with the Swiss fans earlier. It's got a bit quiet, I gather now, Paul.
Yeah, it has. They'll be on their way to the stadium for that game against Brazil later on. That's coming up in just over an hour's time. It's been goals galore today, Mark. I'm not going to lie to you. At the moment, as you say, Ghana hanging on to a 3-2 lead against South Korea. Remember, South Korea in their first game picked up a point, a goalless draw. And Ghana have to win that game. So Ghana clinging on to stay in the World Cup. Earlier, we had a 6-goal thriller. Serbia 2-1 up, I should say, at half-time against Cameroon. That one finished 3-3. So we've had 2 games and 11 goals so far today. They've gone goal crazy here at the World Cup. But we're also looking ahead to the big England-Wales game. England-Wales game tomorrow. I would have never have guessed you were from Portugal. Do you speak English?
Yes, of course.
How are you feeling about playing Uruguay later on? Big game.
We're not scared. We're not scared.
Yeah?
I would say max 1-0, 2-1. We're gonna win. We're gonna win. We're gonna win.
You're gonna be through to the next round.
Of course.
All right.
I'm a little bit scared, but Ronaldo's gonna score the winning goal.
Yeah.
Yes.
For a change.
His last
For a
record.
change. Go ahead.
He's gonna hit his record. Watch. Yes.
Great.
One more goal to hit his big record.
I know. But it's always about Ronaldo, isn't it?
Eh?
It's always about Ronaldo. There's other team. There's other people in the team.
Yeah,
Bruno Fernandes.
Fernandes. He's a really good player. Yeah. He's the future for the company.
Pepe, come on, Pepe, man. Rafael, number 5, Rafael. He's very, very good. Pepe and Rafael, good defense people.
Listen, guys, thanks for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. So, Portugal taking on Uruguay later on today. But let's focus on England and Wales as well, Mark, because Gareth Bale, currently talking in a Welsh press conference at the moment, has said England are beatable. And the Wales manager, Rob Page, has also added that he's been actually really disappointed that the performances that the Wales team put in to get to the World Cup haven't been replicated when they get here. So they've admitted that, look, their performances have been pretty awful so far, but they do say England are beatable, and they'll be well up for it when they play England tomorrow, 10 o'clock local time here in Qatar. And don't forget the England team as well, looking to respond to that awful performance against the USA when really they were lucky to get away with a point. England, of course, favourites to go through. Yeah. They could even lose to Wales tomorrow and still qualify. But it is going to be a fascinating game to watch because both sides have something to prove on top of the British rivalry.
Yeah, I think Wales are probably a lot worse than England, speaking as a Welshman saying that. However, just remind us of what Wales have to do to actually get through. I mean, I think they've got to beat England by 3 goals, is that right?
No, I believe they can still win 1-0.
Right.
Results go their way in the other game, and they can still qualify. England, though, can afford to lose by no more than 3 goals and still go through to the next round if results go their way. So both teams can still go through, but definitely the odds are against Wales.
Yeah, and just to celebrate or commiserate, we've just been updating people with this extraordinary statistic of 6 tonnes of alcohol being imported worth £1 million, including bottles of Welsh whiskey, Penderyn, ready for tomorrow, I gather.
Yeah, look, this could be Wales' last game at the World Cup for some time. Speaking of Welsh fans, they're honest. They're a good bunch of fans. They know that their top players, Aaron Ramsey and Gareth Bale, they're in their early 30s, might not be able to keep going for Wales for much longer. And without that extra edge, they may not be able to qualify for World Cups for some time until more players of that ilk come through their youth system. So if they're going to go out tomorrow, if it's going to be their last game, they're going to go out in style, and they're going to be sinking a lot of that £1 million worth of booze being served up at the hotel bars and fan zones around Qatar. They're going to make sure they go out in style tomorrow.
Yeah. 6 tonnes, though, even a lot for them to get through. We shall see. For the moment, Paul in Qatar, thanks very much indeed. We'll keep you updated on all the action there in Doha. Patrick's up next with all the latest. But before that, let's get an update on the weather for you. See you tomorrow.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. We've seen some fog to start the day in places. That will slowly lift. Some showers as well will ease later. Otherwise, for many, sunny spells, particularly for northern Scotland into parts of northwest England. The south as well seeing some sunshine, but West Wales into the southwest of England, especially Cornwall, will continue to see showers during the afternoon. 1 or 2 showers across central areas, but otherwise a good deal of dry weather, but not sunny for everyone. There will be some low cloud and mist persisting across east and northeast England. Where the low cloud in northeast England lifts and breaks, we're going to see that drifting south during the evening. And during the early hours, that will tend to sit across the Midlands and East Anglia. Showers along the south coast will continue to affect the far southeast. Otherwise, it's a dry night for most, with clear spells towards Scotland, Northern Ireland, Western England and Wales. And here, a chilly start, -3 or 4 Celsius, but there will be some